I was at my desk enjoying a mid-morning coffee that my assistant brought me, though she used artificial sugar. I threatened to switch to black tea instead. I was thinking about a copyright issue that needed immediate resolution, but the federal government was delaying the release of sensitive material. They were slow as usual, making it hard to get anything done. Federal employees showed extreme incompetence, avoiding responsibility without direct orders. I wondered how many people handled a letter before action was taken. I was stuck, unable to move on to my next project, and facing financial loss if items had to be destroyed. The rise of liberal concerns had complicated simple matters, even changing job titles. I felt too old for this nonsense. "There's a young lady here to see you," said Jackie Stoddard, entering my office. "She wouldn't give her name but handed me this picture." As I looked at the photo, dread filled me. Son of a cow, I thought. Why now? It was a picture of Sharon, my ex, and me on our wedding day, taken 18 years ago. It reminded me of the pain, cheating, and tears. People assumed I had returned to lick my wounds, and they were right. Back then, I didn't understand money or power, but I had changed since. "Ask her if she's Susan or Sandra Press," I said, handing Jackie a USB drive and a Ziploc bag. "If she is, show her the video on this. If she wants a copy, give her everything and return the original to me. Come back afterward, and I'll answer your questions." At 42, I embraced bachelorhood. My short marriage to Sharon Grace McCormick had ruined my trust. Now people had to earn it, which was hard. I stood 6'4" with a 38-inch waist, weighing 200 pounds. I worked out at the gym for 2 hours after work. My brownish-black hair was graying slightly, and I still turned heads. I had a few casual relationships, but marriage and love were not for me. About an hour later, Jackie returned, leaving the door open. She explained that the young lady still had many questions. She sat down, her serious face showing she wouldn't leave without answers. Looking at me with her emerald eyes, she waited for me to speak. "Do you know which one it was?" "Sandra," she replied. "Who is she, and why was she so shocked?" She cried, saying, "We've been lied to all our lives. If my heart's right, he was lied to as well." "Sandra is one of a pair of identical twins. The clip you saw was her mother's last words to me before our first divorce hearing, 7 months before the twins were born. I found out about them through friends and wasn't informed she was pregnant. The rest of the items on the stick detail what would happen if I contacted them. Her father, then with the CIA, got me fired from the FBI with false charges because he hated me. The documents imply there's a contract on my life if I interfere with them. He was a powerful, dangerous man. She divorced me to marry my former best friend, with whom she'd been having an affair for months. As far as I know, he's their natural father." "How did she find me, and what does she want?" "Sandra found an old picture in their attic with your name on it, Googled you, and recognized you. She also found the original marriage certificate and divorce papers. She tracked you down through Facebook and other web searches. She came to find a bone marrow match for her twin sister who is running out of time." "Why come to me? I'm not their father. It doesn't make sense," I replied. "Her mother was with her father months before I knew her. Her father ensured that. Sandra suspected something and convinced doctors to run a DNA test during the bone marrow test. Mr. Press isn't their biological father." "What do you think?" Jackie's expression turned into a big smile as tears formed in my eyes. If Sandra was right, it meant my ex had lied to me all those years ago. I wondered if I might be their father. "I knew she was related to you the moment I saw her," Jackie said, standing up. "She has a look that makes it clear." "Are you ready for perhaps the biggest shock in years, Jackie? Send the information on the stick to my publishers. Tell them to release it in a way that can't be traced back to me and not to disclose my writing name because my life might still be at risk. Stress that it needs to be made public quickly. Then find someone to do a fast DNA test and set up an appointment. If I am their father, I want proof when I confront their mother. If it's true, I need a litigation lawyer to fight for my parental rights. Clear my schedule. I need to go to Susan's hospital ASAP," I said. "Now I've got to find Sandra." "Sandra, come in and introduce yourself," Jackie called. Sandra walked in, and the moment I saw her, I knew. She looked just like my younger sister at 16. I choked up, overwhelmed with emotion. Sandra and I both started crying. Jackie took a few pictures with her phone to capture this life-changing moment, and then left us alone. "Sandra and you have an appointment for blood testing at 1. They promised a rush job, and I charged it to the corporate card," Jackie said when she returned. "I also arranged for you to meet your sister Barbara at Kuntel's at 3 and reserved a private table. Sandra needs to see what we do. Barbara will make sure her kids are taken care of. She knows you have important family news." I stood there, emotional and unsure, watching Sandra walk towards me. I had so many questions. I hugged her tightly as Jackie closed the door. It was hard to grasp that I might be a dad. Sandra seemed to feel the same, trembling as we left my office. We tried to keep things light, taking baby steps to figure everything out. After arranging for the clinic to email the report, we headed out for a late lunch. I learned that Sandra had skipped school and driven all day until she had to rest at a station. I was furious that she would do something so risky, but held my tongue, realizing I might be reacting like an overprotective dad. It also reminded me of something I would have done at her age. When we arrived at Cantel's, I noticed Barb's car. "I know we're here to meet your sister, but why did Jackie set this up without talking to you first?" Sandra asked. "You're about to see what Jackie and I saw when we first met you," I replied. "It will explain why we believe you and Susan are my daughters and why I was shocked when the test came back positive." "Can I call you Dad?" Sandra asked. I laughed and smiled. "I'd love that." Cantel's was a family restaurant, a step up from Red Lobster with an excellent reputation. The owner and hostess led us to our private booth immediately. I ordered a bottle of champagne and extra tissues. Barbara had her back to us, so I asked Sandra to wait while I approached. "Hi, sis. Thanks for meeting me," I said. Barbara looked up and said, "You look happy. What's going on?" "Barbara, stand up. There's someone I want you to meet," I said as Sandra approached. "This is Sharon's daughter, Sandra." Barbara turned and stared, looking like she saw a younger version of herself. They had similar features: long brunette hair, high cheekbones, small ears, light blue eyes, and warm smiles. "Oh my God!" Barb exclaimed. "Paul, you should have warned me. This is unbelievable. How long have you known about her?" "About 5 hours," Sandra said emotionally. I surprised him at his office. Jackie and Dad knew immediately. "Seeing you, I understand why." The server returned with tissues and understood why we needed privacy. Barbara, between tears, explained 3 more people would join us, so the hostess moved us to a larger table. Barbara called her husband to join us and notified our parents to come quickly, calling it a family emergency. Mom asked what was wrong, but Barbara said she couldn't explain. We were all emotional. I got a text from Jackie saying the publisher had released the information, and it would be on the 6 o'clock news. We had just calmed down after our first glass of champagne when Barb's husband and my parents arrived. I laughed hearing my dad's loud voice. "There better be a good reason for this." Barbara and I stood to greet them. "Mom, Dad, Lou, I'd like to introduce you to Sharon's daughter, Sandra Press," Barbara said proudly. My mother instantly recognized the resemblance and smiled widely, filled with pride. She finally had the granddaughter she always wanted. My dad was stunned, speechless for once. When he finally spoke, he said, "I see it, but it's hard to believe." My mom sat beside Sandra, holding her hand tightly, too emotional to speak. My dad ordered 2 more bottles of champagne, his pride evident. After our glasses were refilled, I stood up with mine. "I need to explain," I said as Sandra started recording with my phone. I shared how we met and what had happened that day. My dad then stood up. "Sandra, we don't need a DNA test to confirm what we already know. Welcome to our family. You have 2 more aunts to meet soon. Promise us you'll always consider this family your home." Sandra took the phone and spoke. "I came here seeking the truth, not knowing what I'd find. Today has changed everything for Dad and me. We didn't know until now. Meeting Aunt Barb showed me what unconditional love is. My twin sister Susan will feel the same." I scanned the table as everyone became emotional. Even my father, who never cried, had tears in his eyes. My mom held up 2 fingers, crying louder. I captured everyone's joyful tears before stopping the recording. Sandra added her and her sister's info to my contacts and texted Susan, showing me the video she sent. Sandra's message read, "If what we think is true, the DNA test will confirm. Watch the 6 o'clock news. Love, your twin." My mother asked if she was still in disbelief. Sandra showed her photos of Susan and herself. My mom demanded copies for her laptop, displaying them on the full screen for all to see. Sandra then turned off her phone and put it back in her purse, making me realize no one knew where she was. My phone rang. It was Susan. I stood up and walked away to answer it. My dad noticed me tearing up and looked at me questioningly. Sandra mouthed, "It's my sister." My dad nodded, understanding, and I answered the call. "Hello, this is Susan. After seeing the video, I had to call," she said. "Mom won't be home until at least 7 because she's stopping at the police station for an update on Sandra." I'm pretending to know nothing. The police were here earlier and left their card. Any ideas on what I should do? Get him to watch the 6 o'clock news and pay attention to what's revealed about me. Tell him you'll talk when your parents aren't around and show him the video. Give him my number and ask him to text first before calling. He'll understand after watching the news, I replied. Once we have the DNA proof, Sandra and I might bring the whole family. What do you mean? Susan asked. After explaining Sandra's actions to help you, the family will spread the word. I don't know how many will come, but those who can will, I explained. Why? She asked. Family, I said. In the Patterson family, blood is thicker than water. If I'm not a match, someone else might be. Just like that? Susan asked, doubtful. No doubt, you'll see, I said with a chuckle. We are strangers after all. We talked a bit more before saying goodbye, and she replied with relieved sobs. After ordering dinner, I explained to the family why Sandra was here. Immediately, cell phones started buzzing, calling others to spread the word and gather potential matches. My mother took charge of organizing everything. Sandra, how did you get here? My father asked. I drove my old 1994 Voyager van. It's one step up from a rent-a-wreck, she laughed. It's in Dad's parking lot. Son, take that van to my dealership in the morning. She's not driving back in that. It's a miracle she made it here, my dad said firmly. At her age, you had as much sense as she does. She's determined. What do you plan to give her? I asked. She can pick one out, he replied with a wink and a smile. If I could choose, it would be a 4x4. I love the outdoors, Sandra said. My dad responded with a big grin because we all loved the outdoors. If the weather allowed, we were fishing, camping, or hunting. He started reminiscing about the summer I learned to water ski in barefoot, sharing as many stories like he was holding court. Both my parents insisted that Sandra stay with them for the night, agreeing it wouldn't look right for us to be alone. After dinner, Dad drove them to her vehicle and then drove it home. My mother was thrilled, already planning to spoil her new granddaughter. Dad ended up waiting until 1 a.m. for them to get home. Around 10 p.m., the police investigator called me. It took him 2 hours to complete a background check on me. The media was buzzing with questions about the information I released. We discussed the situation and related problems. Seeing the 3 generations in the video had answered many of his questions. I told him we were rushing DNA tests to confirm our relationship and that Sandra was with my parents. Once confirmed, we would return to see if I could be a match for Susan. I asked him to buy us some time and promised to update him on our progress. Susan later told me he reported back to her about our discussion. I was confronting my past again, but with a new perspective. This time, I wouldn't be intimidated by my ex-wife's family's power and money. I would use the media, the courts, and the truth to my advantage. I had the resources, the proof, and a growing determination. I didn't seek revenge, just justice through the truth. I was ready to take on 4 people and the federal government. The next morning, I was in my office, ensuring any schedule changes wouldn't affect me much, and setting up tasks for Jackie while I was gone. Jackie kept checking the email accounts like an overprotective mother, questioning me about my day and extracting all the details she could. To be honest, I never tired of looking at Jackie Stoddard. In her youth, she must have been every teenage boy's dream. Her naturally styled brown hair accentuated her soft features, and her piercing emerald green eyes and full lips were still captivating. As a single man, I often admired her, but was thankful she never caught me looking. Finally, she received the DNA test results, printed them, and exclaimed, "It's confirmed! You are her father!" Jackie immediately called the lab to send the information to Susan's specialist and began searching for the toughest litigation lawyer in New York. After vetting a few, she selected the best and arranged a Skype chat. The lawyer agreed to work on a percentage basis, confident it was a slam dunk with the DNA proof. We would go after my ex-wife, her husband, and her parents for denying me my parental rights. The restrictive court order against me would be squashed, proving their deliberate actions. The supposed contract on my life, even if not factual, would demonstrate their attempts to intimidate and control. The lawyer saw the potential for a significant case, even before involving the government. I told Jackie to send a gray, dust-covered box from the safe to my new lawyer. It contained legal proof that Sharon's father had tried to destroy my career and marriage. It had taken years to collect this evidence through various government levels. I later learned that the police officer had released the video, turning the story into a runaway daughter finding her biological dad to save her sister's life, causing a media frenzy. "Mom, it's confirmed," I said on the phone. "I'm a father twice over. Thank God. Be ready to leave tomorrow at 7 a.m. from the car lot. I'll spread the news. Have you called your daughters? Mom asked. We were now on the road, driving a fully loaded 2-year-old Ford Explorer to Oswego, New York. Sandra and I led the way with my parents in a tour bus and 33 other vehicles following. The tribe was on its way when my phone rang. Sandra answered and put it on speaker. You're being tracked by CNN, Susan said after our greetings. There's a tour bus with a sign saying the Carlsons are coming. 1 out of 141 should be a match. Well, we have the DNA test proving he's our father. I've got a new 2-year-old Ford Explorer, Sandra replied. Dad said, if it was confirmed, a lot of family would come, but I never expected this, Susan explained. It's given me a new hope I never imagined. I can't remember feeling this good. Dad's family spread the word and people came out of the woodwork. I met so many relatives this morning. It will take multiple introductions to remember their names. I met first, second, and even third cousins. I'm so proud I want to change my last name to Carlson, Sandra stated. I never knew families like this existed. I was so overwhelmed I almost went off the road. That's when I decided to write this amazing experience into my next book. My daughters were still talking about Sandra's experiences when Susan said she had to go. Her mother had just entered the room. Dad, are you okay? Sandra asked with concern. I saw you get very emotional. How do you expect me to feel? I discovered I have 2 daughters raised by my ex-wife and a former friend without my knowledge. One is vibrant and full of life. The other is on the verge of dying. One is so strong and independent she moved mountains without thinking, just like I would. And she wants to take my name, I replied with pride. Emotionally overwhelmed, Sandra replied. I was so focused on saving my sister's life. I didn't think about the impact on you. I wasn't a good match because I inherited a defective gene from our mother. The emotional problems I've caused will be felt for days. Can you forgive me? For what? Coming into my life? Turning everything upside down? No, that's what living is about. You've given everyone another person to love. You've given me a chance to be a real dad, I said through tears. Your grandparents adore you. My mother is so proud. Seeing her face in you means everything. You and your sister have become her favorites by birthright. She's been spoiling us. We went shopping, and if she bought me an outfit, she got one for Sue, too. She laughed, saying she had years of spoiling to catch up on. That's Mom. You'll find it impossible to distance her from you. I know, I've tried, I said. Barb and my sisters will brag about this for weeks. By the end, this will become a family legend shared for years. We learned that as soon as Sharon saw the live news feed about our arrival, she began having severe panic attacks. The walls she had built were crumbling. Susan, feeling vibrant and strong, confronted her as soon as she turned off her phone. Mom, why did you hide the truth about our real dad? Susan asked. When she got no answer, she pressed harder. You hid the truth from us, made decisions about our lives. What gave you the right to play God? Even Dad didn't know. If Sandra hadn't found out about him and sought the truth, would you have let me die? Sharon had no answers, never expecting the truth to come out. Her father had hated Paul from the start and did everything to drive him away. Thankfully, Susan's doctor walked in at that moment. We received DNA from a man we didn't know, proving he is Susan's biological father. He is coming to be tested, and there's a good chance he's a bone marrow match. He should be here tomorrow afternoon, and for his protection, he'll be under guard, the doctor said before leaving. Mom, my bio dad is coming with 140 others in case he's not a match. He wants to give me a fighting chance, Susan stated. He's risking his life to help me. Why? Sharon asked. To him and his family, blood is thicker than water. Though I'm a stranger to them, I am family, and family comes first, she replied. You had to know we look like our real dad's mother. Watch this video. It proves everything. Sharon watched the video of my family meeting Sandra. There was no doubt. 3 generations shared the same face. She could no longer deny the truth. Her daughters had proof, and her husband's actions were backfiring. Then a man appeared at Susan's room entrance asking for Sharon. When she admitted she was Sharon Press, he handed her a large legal envelope saying, You have been served. Sharon fell to her knees, sobbing. Susan, furious, felt no pity. Mom, why did Grandpa put a contract on my bio dad's life? Susan asked, knowing she wouldn't get an answer. Arnold Franklin Press had just left a corporate meeting. As he walked down the hall, he was served with legal papers. He sat down in the reception area to read them. The first document was a lawsuit against him and his wife for denying Paul his legal rights as the father of his daughters. The second was against his in-laws and himself, accusing them of conspiring to ruin Paul's marriage and career. It was clear Paul was seeking revenge. demanding sole custody of his daughters. He argued that if Sandra hadn't found him, he would never have known about them. He claimed moral abandonment, suggesting Sharon and Arnold would have let Susan die to keep their secrets. Proving otherwise in court would be difficult given the media coverage. Arnold remembered when he and Paul were university roommates and football teammates. Both had pursued Sharon, but Paul won her over. Arnold had even been the best man at their wedding. However, Sharon's father never approved of Paul due to his background. He convinced Arnold to pursue Sharon, and Arnold agreed. With her father's influence, Paul was kept busy with FBI assignments, leaving Sharon and Arnold alone together. Eventually, Sharon and Arnold became lovers while Paul was undercover for 2 months. Her father had recorded their affair and confronted Paul with the evidence when he returned. Sharon, unaware she was pregnant, thought her missed periods were due to stress. Delighted, her father saw Paul file for divorce immediately. When the twins were born, they knew Paul was the father, but her father had already gotten Paul fired with false charges. It took Paul 4 years to clear his name, during which he left the area in disgrace. Meanwhile, Sharon and Arnold married and had 2 sons. The unedited tapes would prove the conspiracy between Sharon's father and Arnold to break up the marriage. Arnold now wondered how Sharon would react when this truth came out. Sandra, I, and the group arrived at our final stop of the night around 9, exhausted after 14 hours of driving. We ordered a light meal to our rooms and quickly fell asleep until the 5 a.m. wake-up call. Sandra and I left early because I had a secret meeting with the police officer and an FBI representative. The rest of the group left at 7 for the 6-hour drive. Sandra dropped me off at the Oswego Police Department, where I met Detective Peter Rogers and FBI agent Chad Girardeau. We discussed my former father-in-law's questioning for over an hour and a half. I provided my lawyer's contact information and left a USB stick with all my evidence. I was placed under official protection until I left town. With a security escort, I was taken to the hospital for a blood draw to see if I could be a bone marrow match. As I approached Susan's private room, I heard Sandra and Susan talking. The hospital staff recognized me by my writing name, and I signed a book for one of the nurses. I walked into Susan's room. "Dad," Sandra said in surprise. "I didn't expect you so soon." "Susan, this is our dad, Paul Carlson." Susan looked frail, her skin loose and her face reflecting the closeness of end of life. Despite this, her smile was wide and her eyes were bright with hope. "Susan, they're rushing the test. It should be done in 30 minutes. The rest of the family is checking into their hotels. My parents are having their bone marrow drawn now and will meet you soon. If there's more than one match, the doctor plans to do a double transplant simultaneously in both arms," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. Susan broke down in tears. I sat on the edge of her bed and held her until she calmed down. Sandra captured a photo of us both crying tears of joy and relief. She was glowing with pride, and rightly so. I realized how much she had done, and I was overwhelmed seeing my 2 daughters together for the first time. "Grandma, Grandpa, come in and meet my sister," Sandra said. The 5 of us talked for over an hour until Susan's doctor entered smiling. My mother and I were perfect matches for Susan. Dr. Proctor asked if we were ready to be checked in for surgery at 6 a.m. the next day. We both agreed. My dad whispered, "Thank God." We prayed for a miracle all the way up. "Don't you need my parents' permission?" Susan asked. "Normally, yes, but we received a court order this morning thanks to Mr. Carlson. It allows us to proceed if he or a relative is a match. The judge agreed that your mother and her husband weren't putting your needs first," Dr. Proctor explained. "Mr. Carlson will cover all costs not covered by insurance." Sandra smiled. "I'm not surprised, sis. With what Mom and Arnold did, Dad had no choice. Legally, he had no rights, so we used the courts to prevent any delay. A security guard then informed us we were about to be on national news. Susan turned the TV to CNN, which revealed my identity as the author of a popular book series worth an estimated $40 million. Sandra, Susan, and the doctor were amazed. My parents looked at me in shock. They had no idea, thinking I was just an independent corporate financial advisor. "My God, Dad," Susan said. "I've read all your books. They're great." I laughed. After my former life was destroyed, I had to reinvent myself. Writing was my therapy. The first book's success was a turning point, and it grew from there. I keep my books current, exposing the raw truth about world situations, societal views, and morals, whether people like it or not. For the first time in 15 years, I checked into a hospital, along with my mom. My new daughter wanted to share a room with me, but the hospital's security wouldn't allow it. Sandra spent the evening running between 3 different rooms. My dad called some relatives to update them. Sharon and Arnold weren't pleased when they arrived after work. Their attitude was met with coldness. Susan told them she was being prepped for surgery and would receive a double bone marrow transplant in the morning due to a court order. "How?" Sharon asked. "Mom, Arnold, my biodad and his mother are perfect matches. Both are donating so I can get a double dose and recover fully," Susan said. "Mom, do you know who Jason Blackstone is? He's your favorite author." "Well, Jason Blackstone is a pen name for Paul Earl Carlson, my biodad." Sharon and Arnold turned pale. They had hoped the court case would disappear, but Paul's net worth showed he wasn't after money. He wanted justice. Paul always believed in law and order, which made him a successful agent until his termination. "Mom, did you know your father has been in FBI custody all day? You might want to check with Grandma to see if he's home. Can you explain why this is happening? Sandra and I want to know," Susan said with a big smile. "Sandra's somewhere in the hospital, either in Dad's room or Grandma Patterson's if you want to see her." Sandra and I were in my hospital room discussing how she would handle her mother when Sharon found her. A security guard knocked and poked his head in. "Mr. Carlson, do you know a Jackie Stoddard?" I said, "Yes." He opened the door and Jackie came in. Jackie had been my sidekick for 10 years. I had supported her through her divorce after her husband got his assistant pregnant. She was now 35 and a single mother, still adjusting to single life, but still wore her wedding diamond. My family and I loved her, and I often wondered why she hadn't found someone. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I'm here to do what I always do. Look after you. Dr. Proctor said you'd be here for at least 3 days and suspected you were a match. Your arm will take a week to heal enough for light activities. I booked a private jet and a hotel using the corporate card," Jackie explained. "Sandra texted me, 'Dad, FYI, she loves you. She couldn't stay away.'" I raised my eyebrow. The guard poked his head in. "Sharon and Arnold Press want to see you. Will you allow them in?" "Only after they've been searched," Jackie said. "What's your relationship with Mr. Carlson?" the security officer asked. "I'm his fiancé. Didn't you see my ring?" Jackie replied. Sandra winked at me and mouthed, "Told ya." I laughed. As Sharon and Arnold entered, Sandra spoke. "Dad, I wouldn't trust these two for a moment," she said. "They're just trying to cover their backs." "You don't know the half of it, Sandra," Jackie began. "Your dad's lawyer has video showing your stepfather receiving a check from your grandfather as payment to break your parents' marriage. If successful, he would manage your grandparents' finances for a 3% annual fee." "How do you know this is true?" Sharon asked. "And who are you?" "Mom, she's Dad's fiancée and a master researcher. Her name is Jackie Stoddard. I trust her more than you," Sandra said firmly. Sharon's face went white. Her daughters were distancing themselves from her, and there was nothing she could do. "Jackie speaks the truth, Sharon," I explained. "I ordered my lawyer to release all the video and audio tapes to the FBI, including a letter from your father admitting he paid for the recordings. Your father's hatred for me was so great, he didn't care about the cost or who he used to get what he wanted." "Is this true?" Sharon asked Arnold. Seeing his expression, she knew it was. Sharon realized what she lost when I divorced her, the only man who truly loved her. "Jackie, a word of advice. Don't let others manipulate you like I did. Paul, I want to talk to you alone after the surgery. Right now, I need to go home and reflect. Sandra, will you walk with me to my car?" Sharon asked. Sandra said, "I'll be back soon. Mom and I need to settle a few things. Jackie, watch over Dad till I return." We watched them leave. Sharon held it together until she exited, then started to cry. Both Jackie and I understood she had no idea what had been done until now. Arnold, born with a silver spoon, was paralyzed by fear. The truth had come out and their life was shattered. Sharon would never trust him again. "Paul, I dreaded this day. I thought you'd never return. If we had met accidentally, I could have brushed it off," Arnold stated. "I never saw this happening. It's best I leave and say no more." He left, leaving us alone. I looked at Jackie, making her blush for the first time. I was looking at her the way a man in love should. For once, I was opening myself up. Was she playing me? Was she finally admitting her true feelings? Did I love her as a friend or something more? Either way, my daughters had awakened me. I'd been living in others' shadows, finding joy in their excitement instead of creating my own. "Jackie, we have a lot to discuss while I'm in recovery," I said softly. "These last few days have awakened me. I got complacent, settling for the sidelines instead of being in the game. Paul, when I got divorced, you stepped in. My kids were still young. You've been more of a dad to them than their own father. From baseball games to father-daughter dances, you were always there. I know why you pay me well, more than the usual rate. You want to ensure the kids in your heart are looked after, Jackie said. On their birthdays, you always went overboard, making them the envy of their friends. During summer breaks, you took us on special trips, creating lifelong memories. You answer their questions like a father should. They love you, and you love them. Your only problem is your fear of commitment. I tried to speak, but couldn't. Jackie was right, and her words hit me hard. So did Sandra's. I walked over to Jackie and sat beside her, taking her hand. I looked into her eyes, gathering my thoughts. Sharon cheated me. Her father's power intimidated me. My best friend betrayed me. I lived with an ongoing threat on my life. I put myself in protection mode. Until a few days ago, I didn't realize it. Now that I have, can we go on our first actual date? Or is it too late for you and me? I asked. Took you long enough, you old fool, Jackie said before kissing me. I'm texting our kids to tell them we're now a couple and working things out. Pretty sure of yourself, I said. I texted Sandra, thanking her and asking if everything was okay. Sandra responded, Mom didn't know. She's taking it hard. Won't be back tonight. Let Susan know. Jackie and I went up to Susan's room. After introducing Jackie as my girlfriend, we told her what had happened earlier and showed her Sandra's text. We had just finished when my sister Barbara entered. I just had to meet her, Barbara said. Jackie, what are you doing here? I want to say something. But Barb figured it out. He finally clued in, didn't he? She said with a smile. Took him long enough. Susan, this is your Aunt Barbara, and the man entering is your Uncle Lou, Barbara's husband, I said. You'll soon learn we speak our minds, like it or not. I excused myself and went to the nurse's station, texting Sandra to ask about Susan's pizza preferences. She replied that Susan likes everything but anchovies. I ordered 3 extra-large pizzas and 3 2-liter colas for quick delivery. I also called Dad, asking him to bring Mom up in 30 minutes for a pizza party. We pushed the no-eating for 8 hours rule, but got carried away. The head nurse came in to calm us down, but left with a slice of pizza. Later, she stopped me and said, Your actions lifted the spirits of the whole floor. I can't thank you enough. At 4 a.m., they took me and my mom to prepare for the operation. We supported each other until we were wheeled in. I stayed awake until the medication kicked in. When I awoke, it was done. Now came the waiting and praying. Dr. Proctor informed everyone that the bone marrow transfer went well, but it would take a few hours to see if it took. It did. Hearing this, most of the family started preparing to go home. Jackie, I said, is the worst patient ever. But I'm not sick, I replied. You're like a bull in a china shop, impatient, unruly, and miserable. Keep it up and you'll get a bad reputation, Jackie told me. Jackie said my mother was doing well. Once she was sure I was stable, she gave me my phone back. The first texts I saw were from Jackie's kids, both asking, When does she get her engagement ring, Dad? When do we meet our new sisters? Jackie, your kids are smart, I said, showing her the phone. I told them I was coming to Oswego to watch over you. After the operation, they had a lot of questions and the whole story came out. They weren't surprised. They said, Mom, he's always treated us like his own. Most of our friends wish their dads were like him. We've always seen him as our dad, Jackie explained. She read the note and looked at me with tears in her eyes. I guess we'll have a short engagement, I said with a smile. Have you heard from the twins? Sandra and her mother are with Susan. She's doing well considering everything. Even though she's still medicated, she's asking a lot of questions, Jackie disclosed. Sandra told her about the pizza party. Susan can't get over how much she looks like her aunt and grandmother. She can't wait for a girl's day out with them when she recovers. Find me my pants. I want to see her myself and then check on Mom, I said. The nurses tried to stop me, saying it was too soon after surgery, but I insisted. So off we went, holding hands. Surprisingly, my pain was manageable. Jackie and I noticed Susan's improvement immediately. Her complexion was better, and the sparkle in her eyes almost brought tears to mine. Who are Tammy and Timothy Stoddard? Sandra asked. My children, ages 13 and 11. Why? Jackie replied. I got a Facebook friend request from them this morning. So did Susan, Sandra said. You both need to read what they sent me, I said, handing Sandra my phone. She read it, smiled, and passed it to Susan. I want this back to add their phone numbers to my contacts, I said. Sharon then asked if she could talk to me privately, so we went to the waiting room. Paul, I had a long talk with my mother last night. She admitted remembering Dad's hate towards you, but never expected this. My daughters want to finish the school year here and then live with you. They want their last name changed to yours and feel what Arnold and I did is unforgivable, Sharon disclosed. I can't argue with them. They made it clear they'll go to court if I refuse. They no longer trust me, and I can't blame them. Will you let them come? You know my family. They wouldn't let me refuse no matter how I felt. I will gladly take them. So will Jackie. We'll just need a bigger place. I'll drop the suit against you if you agree to joint custody, I replied. The suit will still go forward against the rest of your family. The twins are old enough to decide the rest. Sharon agreed to joint custody. I offered to pay for their name change, but she declined. We walked back into Susan's room together. The girls watched us intently. Jackie, it looks like we're going to need at least a 6-bedroom house, I said. Jackie smiled, and the girls screamed with delight. Sharon said, Girls, your father and I agree. You get your wishes if Jackie agrees. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow to start the legal process for your name change. Paul, Jackie asked, are you ready for this? A house with teenage kids? No one is ever ready, but we'll adapt. I'm just getting used to the idea of 2 carrying my name, I said. Make that 4. Tam and Tim want you to adopt them. They're already signing their names as Carlson. Jackie said, Call Roger Mouser's firm to start the paperwork. Then text the kids to let them know our plans. Let's find out which area has the best schools so we know where to look for our new home. Sandra picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and made a call on speaker. Hello, Tammy said. Who are you, and what do you want? This is Sandra, your soon-to-be older sister. Is Timothy with you? Sandra explained. Can you prove it? Because I can't, Tammy said. Dad taught us not to take calls or messages from unknown sources without proof. Seriously, are you scamming me? Tammy, Paul and I are getting married, Jackie said. You were talking to Paul's daughter, Sandra. We're all going to be Carlsons. Susan and I are changing our last name, and your dad and I have started the process for him to adopt you and change your name to Carlson too, Sandra added. Sweet. Let Dad know it's about time. How is Susan? Timothy replied. We've been waiting to hear. Jackie and I exchanged a look, witnessing the first conversation of our blended family. She squeezed my hand in support. I am improving, Susan said. So far, so good. I'll text you both so you can add my number. Susan, Sandra, our dad is the only father we've known. Our bio dad was gone before we knew him. Your dad has been better than any of our friends' parents. Mom's been in love with him for a long time. When we get together, we need you to accept that we're all siblings, nothing more, nothing less. Tammy and I won't let anything come between them, Timothy said firmly. Both of my daughters agreed. Jackie, with tear-filled eyes, said, They're showing your morals and standards. You should be proud they took your values to heart. I was. We said goodbye for now and headed to see my mom. Dad was with her when we walked in, taking them by surprise. My dad saw a look from Jackie that made him smile. He knew something was up. Mom, I said, you're up and about already. Have you seen Susan? How does she look? Her complexion is improving and her spirits are up, so it's looking good, but it's still too early to tell, I replied. We need to have a serious talk if you both have the time. We're not going anywhere, so let's get to it, my dad responded. Susan and Sandra will live with me after the school year. They'll change their last name to ours, I said. Sharon agreed to joint custody and the name change. It was the twins' idea. That's wonderful, both my parents said. That's not all, Jackie added. Your son has decided to make an honest woman out of me. Elizabeth, are you ready to help plan a wedding? My mom got teary-eyed, and my dad had a big smile. They didn't have to say they approved, we knew. I will be adopting Tammy and Timothy, and they will take my last name. Also, Jackie and I will start house hunting as soon as we get back, I added. What got your head out of your back? My dad asked. We all knew how you both felt about each other. I've been trying to get your mother's approval to knock some sense into you. Earl Carlson, behave yourself. You're not at the yard selling a car, Mom said. Jackie, have you thought about your wedding plans? We haven't discussed it much, but since we're blending 3 families, it should be a family affair. Barb can be my maid of honor, Lou Paul's best man, his brothers-in-law as ushers, Susan and Sandra as bridesmaids, Tammy as the flower girl, and Timothy as the ring bearer. Dad, will you walk me down the aisle with my father? Jackie said with a grin. Depends on who's paying the bill and if the 19th hole is stocked with Jack Daniels, Dad replied, laughing. What do you think, Paul? Jackie asked. It's perfect. It will unite us all. If that's what you want, let's do it, I replied. Should we invite Sharon? Both my parents firmly said no. Mom, Dad, in the next few weeks, the media will reveal a lot. I'm suing the federal government, Sharon's parents, and her husband. I believe Sharon was as much a sufferer as I was. I paid the price years ago, and now Sharon is paying in ways we can only imagine. She thinks she's lost her daughters forever, I explained. Inviting her might help the twins and her forge a new relationship and move on from the past. Jackie and my parents looked at me in awe. Where did that wisdom come from? My dad asked seriously. These last few days have taught me a lot, I replied, holding Jackie's hand. Sandra's arrival made me grasp life again. We returned to my room, and I quickly fell asleep, exhausted from the surgery. Jackie stayed by my side and watched the news. Christopher McCormick and Arnold Press had been arrested for lying to the FBI. The person behind the contract on my life turned state's evidence. My lawyer released details of my firing from the FBI, prompting an internal review. When I woke up, Jackie filled me in. Dr. Proctor informed us that my mother and I would be released the next day. You'll need follow-ups and to get your stitches removed, he said. Susan is doing better than expected. The big question is how she'll respond as she's weaned off her meds. We talked to my parents, who decided not to leave the city until Susan was on the road to recovery. They would fly back with us on the private plane. Dad booked into the same hotel as Jackie, and the bus driver was instructed to head back. Over the next few days, the media exposed the deception, backstabbing, and political deals that ruined my marriage and career. They spent a day discussing how Sharon's father manipulated her into believing the rumors and lies. Sharon was publicly dissected like a frog. Jackie and I were headed to visit Susan one last time before going home. Dr. Proctor had proudly said she was on the road to a full recovery. Someone must have disliked the negative press about the Fed's past dealings with me, because the security release my publisher and I were waiting for was granted. Over 1 million hard copies would be released to the market within 2 weeks. I had 2 first editions delivered overnight. After I signed them, Jackie wrapped them, and we hid them in a shopping bag. We made sure Sandra would be there when we entered Susan's room. Your dad and I have set the wedding date for the first weekend in August. Aunt Barbara will be my maid of honor. I was wondering if you two would be my bridesmaids, Jackie asked. Susan exclaimed, "Hell yes. Jackie, when I first walked into Dad's office, I was scared stiff. You recognized me immediately and said, 'You're Sharon's daughter. How are we going to handle this?' It stunned me. You accepted me from day one. I will proudly be in your wedding party if you'll allow me to call you Mom." I watched as the 3 of them hugged. It was wonderful to see Susan literally jump out of bed. When things settled down, I pulled out the gifts and handed them each a signed first edition of my book, with the message, "To one of the 2 prettiest ladies who call me Dad, with love, Jason Blackstone or Paul Earl Carlson." Susan was ecstatic when she unwrapped it. It was my biggest book yet, over 600 pages. Her face glowed with pride, knowing it wasn't released yet. She flipped open the cover, saw my note, and then lost it. "Dad, you've already done so much. I didn't need this," she sobbed, running into my arms. "Before you came into my life, the hospital staff said I had only a few days left. Sandra knew it too. I don't know why she went into the attic, but I'm glad she did because it brought us you." She hugged me tightly, and Sandra watched us for a few seconds. "Dad, you should know. Dr. Proctor believes if Susan had only gotten 1 transplant, it wouldn't have worked. The double transplant shocked her body into responding. In the last 6 days, she's gained 10 pounds, Sandra explained. I didn't know if you would come, but you didn't hesitate. You brought a tribe. Thanks to the family, I'm getting my best friend back." "How's your mom holding up?" I asked, trying to change the tone. "She's filed for divorce and is going to therapy to deal with a lifetime of lies. She now understands what you went through and is ashamed," Susan said. "She says only someone who has experienced it can understand that it's a living hell. Her work and friends are her support. Mom is strong and will get through it. The key will be getting her to trust again. Right now she doesn't know who or what to believe. Sandra, even with family support, it can take years to regain trust. It requires an unexpected act of faith. For me, it was Sandra walking through my office door," I said. "Thank God you did. Paul had me believing I'd die an old maid waiting for him," Jackie added with humor. "Now, girls, stand by your father so I can capture a few photos. The best one will be an 8x10 for his desk." When we stepped off the plane, we were surprised by Jackie's parents and children there to greet us. The kids nearly knocked me down with their excitement, which spread to all of us. My dad enjoyed hearing them call me Dad. I realized Timothy would have 2 older sisters and 1 younger, just like me. Tammy hugged my mom and said, I'm glad you're becoming my grandmother. I reflected on how quickly my life was changing with unexpected blessings. Jackie and I decided to shelve our pre-Sandra plans until after the wedding. Jackie knew our needs, so I let her handle finding a new home. This gave me time to write my first fiction book. My previous works exposed corruption and cover-ups. We stayed in touch with the twins, and Jackie found a 20-acre property with a barn needing repair. Susan was improving and returned to school part-time. We had a firm design our house with steel and brick, including an outdoor kitchen, large patio, pool, and a 4-bay garage. Jackie's reduced office time let me work harder, with an editor from my publisher helping. I wrote over 300 pages, publishing my first book under my real name. Sharon used my lawyer to divorce Arnold, securing alimony and education costs. My cases were in mediation as they lost the will to fight. Tammy, Timothy, Jackie, and I awaited the twins' arrival after their last school day. Timothy saw them driving up our new driveway. We all went outside to greet them. As they stepped out of the Explorer, I realized Susan's recovery was so remarkable I couldn't tell her from Sandra. Jackie whispered, "We'll figure it out." Timothy, playing big brother, carried their luggage as Jackie showed off the house. In my office, 3 copies of my latest book, Unexpected Blessings, sat on my desk. It was a fictionalized story of us.
Wife contracts STD and ends up in hospital after infidelity with her boss is exposed. It was barely 8:45 a.m., but this Monday was already shaping up to be the worst one I'd ever had. I'd kissed my wife Marissa goodbye earlier that morning. She's been my partner for 15 years and is an incredibly successful real estate agent, judging by her impressive stack of commissions and bonuses. "You have a good day," she chimed in that overly polished realtor voice she knew I couldn't stand. Her smirk suggested she was holding back a secret, which only added to my irritation. On my way to the office, I couldn't stop thinking about the heap of reports due by the end of the month. I got in at my usual time, 7:45, dropped off my briefcase, and headed to the men's room for a quick coffee break. That's when everything went sideways. While at the office, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a sharp pain at the welcome, prompting a loud scream. My boss, Alan Randall, quickly came to assist, expressing deep concern. I described the burning sensation, and we both noticed the alarming greenish discharge. Alan immediately advised me to seek medical attention and reassured me not to worry about the pending reports, promising to handle them and suggesting I take the necessary time off. Grateful, I thanked him for his understanding and support, appreciating his compassionate approach during such a distressing moment. I splashed water on my face, grabbed my briefcase, and headed out the door. I told the receptionist I wouldn't be back for at least a day, maybe longer. Normally, I'd see my regular doctor, but his office was clear across town, and I doubted I'd get an appointment today. Instead, I opted for the urgent care just a few blocks from my office. Once there, they quickly took some samples and directed me to the waiting room. It felt like hours, but only 30 minutes passed before a nurse called out sharply, "Greg Watson." She gestured for me to come over with a look that made me feel less than human. Curious about her demeanor, I followed her to the observation room. "Have a seat, Mr. Watson," she instructed coldly. I sat down and watched as she took my vitals, blood pressure, temperature, the works, without much conversation. After jotting down the details, she mentioned, "The doctor will see you shortly," and left the room. Not long after, there was a knock on the door, and an older man in a white coat entered, holding a folder. "Mr. Watson, I'm Dr. Smith," he introduced himself. Sitting down, he opened the folder and didn't mince words. "Your tests show you have gonorrhea." I repeated, stunned. "Gonorrhea?" "Yes, it's a sexually transmitted disease," Dr. Smith said, giving me a look that suggested I should have known better. "I'll prescribe an antibiotic and you should avoid any sexual activity for at least 7 days. After you finish your treatment, if you still have symptoms, see your primary doctor." The news hit me like a truck, but Dr. Smith's straightforward manner helped cut through the shock. I nodded, processing the steps I needed to take next. He started by saying that other tests were ongoing and it could take a couple of weeks or more to get my results. He then asked for a list of people I'd recently been in contact with. "I've only been intimate with one person in my entire life," I told him. "My wife." He gave me a sad look for a moment before checking my chart. "If I got it from her, wouldn't she show symptoms?" I asked. "Not necessarily, Mr. Watson," he replied. "She might confuse them for something like a bladder or vaginal infection. It's important she gets checked soon. Waiting could lead to serious complications." "Excuse me, Mr. Watson," he said, handing me some medication and having me sign a few forms. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Watson, and make sure to follow up with your doctor," he advised as he left. Feeling a mix of emotions, I finished up and headed to my car. I called my boss to update him. "I'm sorry to hear that, Greg," Alan said. "Don't worry, your privacy is my priority. You'll take a leave and return when you're ready. I've taken care of your reports, so just focus on getting better." "Thank you," I replied, ending the call. Next, I had to talk to my parents, whom I never hid anything from. I hit their speed dial and my dad answered. "Hey son, are you at work?" he asked. "No, Dad, I'm dealing with a health issue and need to talk with you and Mom," I said. "Of course," he replied. "Are the kids okay?" "They're fine," I assured him, "but I'd rather not discuss this over the phone." "Come over then. We'll have coffee and talk," he suggested. We hung up, and I put away my phone, ready to face the next conversation. I should tell you a bit about my background. My sister Denise and I were raised in a very religious and loving family. Our childhood was filled with laughter and love, and although our parents were very much in love, they were also quite strict. One of the key rules in our house was no sex before marriage. Because of this upbringing, I didn't have sex until I married Marissa. While we were dating, I told her I wanted to wait until marriage. She responded with a big smile and a deep kiss, saying, "That's so sweet. I promise I'll rock your world on our wedding night." And she certainly did. It was an incredible experience, and she was patient and loving as she showed me how to make love in a way that pleased her. Eventually, I began to really enjoy our intimacy, and it seemed she did too. Marissa had been with others before me, but that didn't bother me as long as she was committed to our relationship. Not long after we married, she took a job at a busy real estate office while working towards her license. Our first daughter, Lisa, was born about a year into our marriage, followed by Ginger a year later. Marissa decided to have her tubes tied after Ginger's. Tough delivery, feeling that 2 children were enough. While I had hoped for a son, I couldn't have been happier with my daughters. Both became the light of my life, quickly turning me into a doting father. When Marissa went back to work after her maternity leave, I often found myself playing the role of Mr. Mom, especially when she worked late or had paperwork to catch up on. As the girls grew, I took them to their various activities, Lisa with her music lessons and Ginger with her sports, particularly when Marissa's work took her away in the evening. Over time, though, Marissa started to be away even more frequently, attending seminars and company retreats, sometimes over weekends or for an entire week. She always made sure to call us every night, but the increasing distance was hard. On top of everything, she developed an irritating fake persona that really got under my skin. I brought it up more than once, but she seemed committed to it. Her attitude toward work had shifted too, and I started to wonder if she was spending too much time there. Even our daughters began to notice the changes in their mom. Despite these issues, the thought of her being unfaithful never crossed my mind. She knew my strong stance on infidelity. One day I arrived at my parents' house and pulled into the driveway. My dad greeted me at the door with a warm hug and a pat on the shoulder. "We just finished the coffee. Come on in, and we'll make some more and talk," he invited. I walked into the dining room and gave my mom a hug before we sat down at the table. She poured us coffee and I added cream and butter pecan syrup to mine. Dad did the same, and we each took a sip. "Why don't we start with a prayer?" Dad suggested. Of course, I agreed. It was their way, prayer first, then conversation. After a few minutes of prayer, we got down to business. "What's wrong, son?" Dad asked. "I just came from the urgent care clinic." "I have gonorrhea," I said. "Oh my God," Dad responded quietly, always composed as long as he heard the truth. "Were you fooling around?" he asked after a pause. "No, Dad, never," I assured him. "Marissa is the only woman I've ever been with." He nodded. "I believe you, son. I just needed to hear you say it. What are you planning to do?" Mom chimed in. "I don't see any other option but to divorce her," I admitted. "It's going to be tough on the girls. They're old enough to understand," I added. "I can't just overlook this. Even if she promises it won't happen again, I can't trust her." "Do you know how long this has been going on?" Dad asked. "I just found out this morning," I replied. "Adultery is a clear ground for divorce," Dad said, getting up to go to his office. Mom looked heartbroken. "I'm so sorry this is happening, Greg," she said. "I always thought Marissa was such a wonderful woman." "Me too, Mom. It seems she fooled us all." Dad returned with his Rolodex, flipping through until he found a particular card. "There she is," he said. "You know Gina Hawkins, the family law attorney from our church?" I asked. "Yes, that's her." "Let me give her a call," he said. It wasn't surprising he had her card. As a deacon, Dad kept contacts from the congregation handy. He dialed and spoke to Gina's secretary before getting through to her. Gina, hi, it's Dan Watson. Yes, from the church. Listen, I'm calling because my son could really use your help soon. He's facing a tough situation, and I think you could assist. Oh, really? This afternoon at 12:30? That's perfect. I'll make sure he gets there. Thanks so much, Gina. I owe you one. Take care, and give your little one a big hug from us. Okay, bye. After hanging up, Dad turned to me. That was Gina. She can see you today at 12:30 thanks to a canceled appointment. Make sure you bring your financials and tax returns from the last 2 years, he informed me. Okay, I said, realizing I needed to get my documents ready. I guess I'd better head inside and pack my things. That sounds like a good plan, Dad replied. And you have to talk to Marissa about the STD. She needs to get tested as well to prevent any further spread. Maybe the girls should stay with us for a bit, Mom suggested. Things might get tense at home with everything going on. You're right, Dad agreed. Have them stay a few days until things calm down. Look, son, why don't you bring the girls over after school? We'll take care of getting them to school on time. I will. Thanks, Dad, I said. We chatted a bit more before I got up to leave. Dad hugged me at the door. It'll work out, son, he reassured me. Just don't do anything rash. I know you're hurt and might want revenge on Marissa, but remember Romans 12:19, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Don't make me bail you out of jail. Think about your girls. I grinned. No problem, Dad. I got it. I got back in my car and headed home. Dad was right about one thing. I did want revenge on Marissa and whoever else was involved. After over 15 years of loving her exclusively, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. When I arrived home, I started going through my files to find my old tax returns. I also needed to find Marissa's because about 8 years ago, she had suggested we file taxes separately to save money. Back then, it made sense. But when I looked at her tax forms, I discovered the real reason she wanted us to file separately. Marissa had earned much more in bonuses and commissions than I had realized. Seeing how much she had put into our joint bank account, I wondered where all her extra money had gone. My search led me to a folder full of bank statements from a bank I didn't recognize. The latest statement showed she had saved almost $1 million over the past 8 years. What was her plan, I wondered? Was this some kind of plan for when the kids went to college? I collected the statements and her tax forms, put them in my folder, and went to my car. Just as I was about to leave, my phone beeped with a text from Marissa. She said she would be late because of a showing and not to wait for dinner. Yeah, sure, I said to myself. I replied, no problem, see you when you get home. As I sent the message, I couldn't help but wonder if she noticed that I didn't say I love you like I usually do. I arrived at Gina Hawkins' office building, parked the car, and headed to her suite. As I walked in, I was greeted by an attractive blonde receptionist. I'm here to see Gina Hawkins, I told her. I have an appointment for 12:30. After a quick check on her computer, she smiled and led me to Gina's office. Gina stood to greet me, shaking my hand warmly. It's good to see you, Greg, she said, smiling. Would you like some coffee? That would be great, thanks, I replied. Gina turned to the receptionist. Could you bring 2 cups of coffee, please, and maybe some butter and nuts? Sure, the receptionist replied before leaving the room. She returned shortly with 2 cups and some butter portions. Gina motioned for me to sit, and I took a seat across from her. I was surprised to get a call from your father this morning, Gina began. So you're facing a problem that needs legal attention? Yeah, it looks like Marissa's been unfaithful, I said. I'm sorry to hear that, Gina responded, her expression sympathetic. I always thought you two were solid. So did I, but I guess I was wrong, I said. Can you tell me about my options? I explained the situation, including my visit to the clinic and the discovery of the bank statements earlier that day. Gina nodded thoughtfully. I understand how tough this must be, she said. Let me explain a bit about how divorce works here. It's not necessarily about justice, it often comes down to finances. In this state, we have no-fault divorce laws, but you can still file on grounds of adultery if you have strong evidence. What about the STD she gave me? I asked. Gina nodded. That's a strong point, she acknowledged, but her lawyer might claim you caught it from someone else. We know that's not true, but we need to convince a judge. Regarding the money she set aside, she could argue it was meant as a surprise for retirement. You don't really believe that, do you? I questioned. No, it seems more like an exit strategy, Gina replied. She's probably waiting for an opportune time, maybe after your daughters finish school, to leave without complications. Proving that in court, though, will be difficult. So I'm just out of luck, I pressed. Not necessarily, Gina reassured me. I can hire a private detective to investigate. It's pricey, but it could provide the solid evidence we need in court. Would you like to proceed with that? Yes, let's go ahead, I decided. Great, Gina responded. I'll need all the... Details you can provide: her car's make and model, license plate number, places she frequents. I pulled out my phone. Actually, I installed a phone tracker app when she lost her phone a few months back. Oh, let me check if it's still active. I opened the app and located her phone at a house on the north side of town. I showed Gina the address. Perfect, she said, jotting it down. I'll get in touch with my investigator right now. She made the call, giving the investigator all the details we had. After hanging up, she looked at me with a determined expression. We'll handle this as discreetly as possible, she assured me. Okay, we're all set. If there's something going on, we'll find out soon enough. Now, let's focus on your situation. You have 2 teenage daughters, Lisa and Ginger, ages 14 and 13, correct? Gina asked. Yes, that's right. They're not quite old enough to choose which parent they want to live with, but it's getting close. I want to seek custody, I confirmed. Understood, Gina nodded. You should know that courts typically favor the mother for primary custody. However, we can certainly make a case for you, especially given the circumstances. Who's been the main caretaker? Marissa often goes out in the evenings, so I've been the one at home, I explained. Got it. And just to clarify, are you certain the girls are biologically yours? She inquired cautiously. I believe so, yes. At this point, does it matter? My name is on their birth certificates and I've raised them since they were babies, I replied a bit defensively. I understand, Gina reassured me, but it might be good to know for sure. I can refer you to a lab for a paternity test if you'd like. Okay, I'll think about that, I said. What about the house situation? We don't have a mortgage. The house was my grandparents' and now it's in a family trust under my parents' names. They let us live there, I explained. Good, that simplifies things a bit. No mortgage issues to deal with, she noted. There will still be personal property and possibly other assets to consider dividing. I'll prepare a list of what you need to address. Is there anything else I need to do right now? I asked. Not at this moment, she replied. I'll start drafting the paperwork, but let's wait to see what the private investigator finds before we proceed too far. However, go ahead and complete the checklist I give you. Do you think I should confront her about this personally? I wondered aloud, but it might be wise to at least inform her that she needs to get tested for STDs to prevent any further spread. It's important for both your sakes, Gina advised. That makes sense, I agreed. After finalizing the paperwork, Gina handed me a checklist and a card with the lab's contact information. Anything else I should know? I asked. That's all for now, she replied. Go ahead and handle these tasks. We'll inform you if we receive any updates from the investigator. For any questions about the fees, please speak to my secretary. And Greg, yes? Yes, I responded. Don't do anything rash. We'll get through this together. It won't be easy, but things will improve. I understand, I said, appreciating her support. Thanks for everything. You're welcome, she responded. We'll keep in touch. With that, I left her office, wrote a check for her services, and drove to the lab. After picking up the test kit, I stopped by the bank to verify some of the details Gina had mentioned. Then I headed home. This might have been a moment for some to drown their sorrows in alcohol, reflecting on the misery of their situation, but that's not me. I've never been a drinker, another one of those rules I grew up with. My parents didn't drink, and neither did I. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Just as the coffee was ready, my 2 daughters burst through the door. They usually came home around this time, taking the bus. Normally, they wouldn't see me until later, but today was different. Daddy, you're home, Lisa greeted me with surprise. Are you okay? Yes, Daddy, why are you home so early? Ginger chimed in. It's been a pretty hectic day, I explained. Listen, could you 2 pack some things for a few days? You're going to stay with your grandparents for a while. Why, Daddy? Ginger's voice was laced with concern. What's going on? Is something wrong with Mom? Did you guys have a fight? Well, yes, something is wrong, but your mom and I haven't had a fight. That might happen later, I said, trying to keep the conversation as light as possible. You caught her cheating, didn't you? Lisa's question caught me off guard. I was taken aback. What makes you think that? I asked. She looked down, slightly embarrassed. I've heard her on the phone a couple of times, she confessed. She was using that fake voice she does, you know, the one that annoys you. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. It was something like, I can't wait to see you again, love, and then she giggled. Not like herself at all. It sounded very personal. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I know you don't like gossip, she added. It's all right, I reassured her, giving her a hug. Lisa then added, she's been acting really strange lately. It's like she doesn't really want to talk to us much anymore. Do you feel that way too, Ginger? I asked, turning to my younger daughter. She nodded. Yeah, like she doesn't want us bothering her. I gave them both a reassuring hug. You can bother me any time, I smiled. But right now I need to swab your cheeks for a test. Cheek swab? Ginger inquired, eyeing the test kit. Yes, I confirmed. My lawyer thinks we should do a DNA test. You don't think we're really your kids? Lisa asked, a hint of worry in her voice. I know you're my kids, I reassured her. But we just need to confirm everything legally. So you're getting a divorce? Lisa asked directly. It looks like it, I acknowledged. Isn't there any way you could forgive her? Ginger wondered softly. I don't think so, I replied. She made a mistake that's pretty serious. I had to see a doctor about it this morning. Lisa gasped, almost slipping out a swear word. Sorry, she muttered. It's okay, I assured her with a weak smile. I felt like swearing today too. Now let's get these samples done. I swabbed the inside of Lisa's cheek gently, then did the same for Ginger. Once their samples were secured in the kit, I took a swab from my own cheek and placed it into a separate vial. Okay, you two head upstairs and pack enough for a couple of nights. We need to be ready to leave in 15 minutes. And don't forget your homework, I instructed. As the girls went to their rooms to gather their things, I organized the DNA test kit. My plan was to drop the kids off at their grandparents' house and then take the kit to the lab. As we drove, Lisa asked, Daddy, if you get divorced, can I stay with you? Yeah, me too, Ginger chimed in. I hope so, girls, I responded. I'm going to ask for custody, but you need to understand that courts often favor the mother. I don't want to stay with her, Lisa confessed. Right now, I hate her for what she did to us. I thought about encouraging her not to hate her mother, but I held back. She was voicing feelings that were all too familiar to me. I understand how you feel, sweetheart, I assured her. Just remember, no matter what happens, I love you both immensely, and I'll always be there for you. I love you too, Daddy, Lisa said, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her tears made my resolve even stronger, fueled by my anger towards Marissa. In my mind, I vowed retribution. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. My father's words echoed in my head, calming my vengeful thoughts. We arrived at my parents' house and pulled into the driveway. I hugged and kissed both girls, promising to call them later. We were met at the porch by my dad, who hugged the girls as they carried their bags inside. Mom came out to greet us too. I'd better get to the lab before it's too late, I said after a few moments. Are you okay? My dad asked, concern evident in his voice. As fine as I can be under the circumstances, I replied. We'll pray for you, he said. Give us a call and let us know how things go with Marissa, he added. I will, but I'm not sure when that will be, I replied. It's okay, son, Mom reassured me. You can call any time. Thanks, I said, giving her a hug. I'd better head off now. I left, feeling a mix of support from my family and the heavy burden of the steps I needed to take next. I got back in my car and headed to the lab, arriving about 30 minutes before they closed. I handed the DNA test kit to the receptionist. How soon can I expect the results? I inquired. We should have them ready by the end of the week, she replied with a reassuring smile. Great, thanks, I said and left for home. Along the way, I felt the need to talk to someone who might shed more light on Marissa's behavior. I decided to call her sister, Loretta. I connected my Bluetooth earpiece and dialed her number. She picked up after the second ring. Hey Greg, how's my favorite brother-in-law? Loretta greeted cheerfully. I've had better days, I replied. Do you have a minute to talk? Of course, she responded. What's going on? Have you spoken to Marissa recently? Not since the family gathering last month at your place, I said. Actually, things aren't great. I briefly explained the situation, keeping the details succinct yet clear. Oh my God, Loretta gasped after I finished. Greg, I hate to say this, but it seems like she's fallen back into old patterns. Old patterns? I echoed, puzzled. Loretta hesitated before continuing. Marissa was quite wild in her younger days. She went through relationships rapidly, almost as fast as changing clothes. She wasn't faithful to anyone she dated during high school and college. I thought she had changed after meeting you. She even told me she had found her soulmate and was done with her old ways. I didn't think it was necessary to bring it up before. I appreciate that, but I wish I had known, I admitted. I'm sorry, Greg. I should have told you, she said. It's okay, Loretta. It's not your fault, I assured her, trying to keep my emotions in check. Listen, I understand you're planning to have her move out. I'm calling to see if she could possibly stay with you for a while, I said, getting to the point. Actually, yes, I added, if that's okay with you. I heard Loretta sigh on the other end of the phone. She might stay here for a bit until she sorts herself out, she said. Frank won't be thrilled, though. I don't want to cause any trouble for you guys, I responded, concerned. It's okay, he'll manage, just as long as it's not for too long, she reassured me. Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm not sure when she'll be home tonight, but I'll give you a call when she's on her way to you, I said. Thank you, Loretta replied. How did the girls handle everything? They're upset, but they're handling it better than I expected, I answered. You've raised strong young women, Greg. Stay strong for them, she encouraged. I'm trying, I said. I need to go make dinner now. We'll talk later, okay? I will, I promised, and then we ended the call. Back home, I warmed up some leftover meatloaf for dinner. Just as I finished eating, the phone rang again. It was Gina, my lawyer. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 6:30 p.m. Hey, I greeted her. Working late tonight? I asked for you, yes, Gina replied. I've received some preliminary findings from the private investigator. It appears Marissa has been quite active. She's met with 3 men since this afternoon. I was stunned. 3 men in one day? How does she even find the time? Yes, Gina confirmed. I'm sending over the details now, photos, videos, and a summary of the report. I'd advise against watching the video, but you should definitely listen to the last few minutes of the audio. It's quite revealing. So, do you think you have enough to proceed with the divorce? Absolutely, I affirmed. Good. Listen to that audio and then call me, she instructed. Will do. Thanks, Gina, I said, hanging up, feeling a mix of anger and relief that I was finally moving forward. I booted up my laptop and accessed my email. I found the video Gina mentioned and fast-forwarded to the specific part she had highlighted. Although I had no interest in watching Marissa in such a compromising situation, I was compelled to understand the context of their conversation. I see you're married, the man remarked, noting her rings. For the moment, Marissa replied casually. I noticed you're married too, she observed, glancing at his ring. Yes, my wife and I have an open relationship, he explained. And you? It's not open in that sense, but I take my freedoms as they come, she stated. So your husband doesn't know? He probed. No, he doesn't, she confessed. He has no idea what kind of person he's married to, I thought bitterly. Now I'm realizing the truth. What's the matter? Isn't he good to you at home? The man asked, digging deeper. He had better be. I taught him everything he knows, she boasted. You taught him? The man seemed surprised. Was he inexperienced when you married? Believe it or not, he was a 23-year-old virgin, she divulged. He's quite religious, doesn't smoke, drink, or even curse. He'd probably have a fit if I swore around him. He didn't even know how to make love until we were married. Damn, the man reacted. Sounds like you think he's a loser. So why stay with him? Is there love? In some way, I suppose. He's a good father, looks after our girls well, and doesn't complain when I come home late. But beyond that, he's dull, she admitted. Are the girls even his? He asked curiously. She shrugged nonchalantly. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe. It doesn't matter much to me. He believes they're his, and that's what counts, she claimed. How long have you been fooling around? He inquired. I don't mind saying, she replied breezily. I've been having my fun throughout our marriage, and he's still clueless. He has no idea, hasn't been with anyone else, so how would he know any different? Is that it? He asked. That's it, she confirmed. Hearing her dismiss our life and our family so flippantly devastated me. The depth of her deceit was far worse than I had imagined. At that moment, I had to hold back from throwing up. It made me feel sick to think that she'd been treating me like this throughout our entire marriage. Do you plan to stick with him? Yeah, for now. At least until the girls finish high school and head to college, she said. That's in about 4 or 5 years. I'll have everything ready to leave by then. Why wait? Because usually the courts give custody to the mom, and the last thing I want is to end up with 2 teenage girls on my hands. She said, What are you going to do after this? I want to party. Maybe hang out with a few people at once, maybe go on a cruise or retire to Costa Rica or something. I'm not sure, she said. Oh, I've got a couple of guys. Can you sneak away for the weekend? He asked. Sure, she said. I can tell Greg I have a mandatory weekend seminar or something. He'll believe anything I say. Let me know when you can leave and we'll arrange it. You have my number? I will, she said, smiling. He checked his watch. It's getting late and I need to go. I can't wait to see you again, honey. I'm excited too, she said. He left, and Marissa sat on the bed with a big grin. Oh, Greg, she said to the empty room. You have no idea what's coming. After watching the video, I sat there, stunned, wiping away tears. The depth of Marissa's betrayal hit me harder than I'd anticipated. With a heavy sigh, I dialed Gina. I just finished watching the video, I told her. You were right. It was enlightening. Gina's response was prompt. What's your next move? Burn it to the ground, I replied, my voice steady. Consider it done, she affirmed. And what about the men she was with? Is there anything we can do about them? I inquired, though part of me dreaded the answer. Unfortunately, no, Gina explained. Alienation of affection lawsuits aren't recognized in this state anymore. I paused, a bitter chuckle escaping me. Don't worry, their own circumstances will catch up with them soon enough. Echoing my father's earlier words, I murmured, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." Gina chuckled softly. "Well, I need to get going," she said. "I'll start preparing the divorce papers and get everything in order. If Marissa plans to run, we'll make sure it's not on her terms." "Thanks, Gina, I really owe you for this," I said gratefully. "Just take good care of your girls," she advised. With our conversation over, I leaned back on the couch, tears streaming down my cheeks. 15 years of my life given to someone who had so little regard for our family, the pain was almost unbearable. A few minutes after hanging up with Gina, my phone buzzed. It was Marissa calling. "Hi," I answered. "Hi, Greg," she responded. "Are you okay?" "It's been a tough day," I admitted. "What's up with you?" "I'm just wrapping up at work." "I think I closed another sale," she said, sounding upbeat. "That's good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll be home soon, so I'll see you in about half an hour, okay?" "Sure," I agreed. "Okay, I'll see you then. Love you," she said, her voice taking on that unnervingly insincere tone. "Me too," I responded and hung up. I wondered briefly if she noticed my lack of an "I love you" in return, but then realized it no longer mattered to me whether she did or not. I gathered the evidence I had printed earlier, 4 photos of Marissa with other men, all on a single sheet, and placed them in a folder. I arranged the folder on the kitchen table, where I planned to confront her when she arrived home. With everything set, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat down to wait. As the clock ticked past 1 hour, then 2, Marissa still hadn't come home. Concern mingled with frustration. I figured she might be delaying her return deliberately, but as more time passed without any word from her, worry crept in. I tried calling her cell phone, only to be directed to voicemail. I left a message and followed up with a text, but there was no reply. 3 hours after our call and still no sign of her, I began to fear something more serious might have happened, like an accident. Almost 3.5 hours after Marissa was supposed to be home, my home phone rang. I hurried to answer it, hoping it was her, but it wasn't. "Greg Watson," I answered. "Mr. Watson, this is Angela Barnes from Mercy Hospital. Are you related to Marissa Watson?" "She's my wife," I responded, my heart sinking. "Mr. Watson, your wife was in an accident and has been brought here for treatment. Can you come as soon as possible?" "Yes, of course," I said anxiously. "Is she okay? What happened?" "I'm sorry, sir, I can't provide any details," Angela replied. "Her doctor will speak with you when you arrive. Please come to the courtesy desk and they will direct you from there." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my composure. After hanging up, I stuffed the envelope with the pictures into my jacket pocket. I considered calling Dad or Loretta for support, but decided to wait until I knew more. I drove to the hospital with a heavy heart, parked quickly, and hurried inside. At the courtesy desk, I introduced myself. "I'm Greg Watson, here to see Marissa Watson," I told the middle-aged woman behind the counter. She looked up Marissa's information and then nodded to another staff member. "Would you please take Mr. Watson to the ICU?" she instructed. The woman came around the desk and gestured for me to follow. We walked in silence to the ICU, where a police officer was waiting. "Mr. Watson?" he asked as we approached. "That's me," I confirmed. "I'm Officer Simpson. I responded to your wife's accident," he explained. "She was driving through the intersection of 3rd and Main when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car on the driver's side." My heart ached at the details. "I'm very sorry," he added, his tone sincere. "It's okay," I managed to say, although nothing felt okay. "Her car was towed to the junkyard," he continued. "There's not much left of it." He handed me a business card from the tow truck company. "If there's anything I can do to help, please give me a call." "Thank you, officer," I said, accepting the card. My mind raced with worry as I prepared to see Marissa, unsure of what awaited me. When the officer left, a man in a white medical coat approached me. "Greg Watson?" he inquired. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Dr. Blake, the doctor overseeing your wife's treatment. Can we talk for a moment?" "Of course," I responded. He led me to a small room, closed the door, and sat across from me at a round table. "How is my wife?" I asked immediately. "She has multiple broken bones and several internal injuries. Additionally, she suffered a severe blow to the head. We've placed her in a medically induced coma to aid her recovery," he explained. I nodded, bracing for more. "Is there anything else?" "Yes, there is more concerning news. Our preliminary tests suggest that she may be HIV positive. We've sent samples for more detailed blood tests, but it will take some time to confirm," Dr. Blake continued. I felt a cold wave of shock. I found out this morning she has gonorrhea, I shared, still processing the news. And are you receiving treatment for that? He asked. Yes, I confirmed. That's good to hear. However, I recommend you get tested for HIV as soon as possible. If you could see your primary care doctor tomorrow, that would be best. It's important to know your status, he advised. I nodded, absorbing his recommendations. How long will she be in the coma? I asked, shifting the topic back to Marissa. It depends on her progress, but it could be anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. After that, her stay here may extend depending on her recovery speed, he explained. Can I see her now? I asked, eager yet anxious. Absolutely, Dr. Blake said, standing. She needs your support now more than ever. He led me to the door and pointed down the hall. She's in room 5, just over there. Thank you, doctor, I said, shaking his hand before walking to Marissa's room, my mind racing with everything I had just learned. I walked into Marissa's hospital room, and the sight of her struck me hard. She was swathed in bandages, with one leg encased in a cast that extended to her hip. Her face was bruised and swollen, stitched cuts marring her skin. She looked as though she had barely survived a brutal battle. Silently, I said a prayer for her, then took off my wedding ring. I pulled out the envelope containing the photos, wrote her name on it, and placed my ring inside before sealing it. Turning to the nurse who was attentively monitoring Marissa, I held out the envelope. Could you make sure she gets this when she wakes up? I asked. Of course, the nurse replied warmly. You can place it on that tray over there, she suggested, pointing to a nearby wheeled tray. Thank you, I said, setting the envelope on the tray to ensure Marissa would see it upon awakening. I lingered for a moment, looking down at Marissa. Despite everything, it pained me to see her in such a state. Noticing she was still wearing her wedding rings, I gently removed them and pocketed them. Goodbye, Marissa, I whispered. I'll see you later. With a nod to the nurse, who offered me a sympathetic smile, I left the room. Driving home, I called Loretta to update her on the situation. She was stunned by the news, especially the complications with Marissa's health. Greg, you know Frank won't be comfortable with her staying here if she's HIV positive, Loretta stated, her voice filled with concern. He's worried about the kids, and I can't argue with him on that. Her parents had moved to Florida in retirement, eliminating another potential support option. Then it seems I'll need to find her an apartment, I concluded. I think that's wise, Loretta agreed. I'm sorry, Greg, but I have to prioritize my family. She's made her choices. I can help move her belongings, but after that, I need to step back. I understand, I reassured her. You're doing what you need to do. It's late, and I need to get some sleep, but please keep me posted, she said. I will, I promised. Thanks for everything, Loretta. Hanging up, I felt the weight of the day settling over me as I drove the rest of the way home in silence. It was close to midnight when I finally reached home. Exhausted from the day's events, I quickly undressed and fell into bed, asleep almost the moment my head hit the pillow. The next morning, I woke up feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I called my doctor's office and was surprised to find they could fit me in for an appointment later that morning. After securing my appointment, I called my parents to update them on Marissa's situation. They were understandably shocked, particularly about the possibility of her being HIV positive. They offered to bring the girls to the hospital if they wished to visit her. I also shared with them the troubling evidence I had gathered about Marissa. Dad asked me to send the details to his email, which I did immediately. It's really bad, I admitted over the phone. It's all right, son, he reassured me. We'll handle this together. Once I had sent the email, I called Gina to inform her of the latest developments. She was also taken aback, but mentioned that this would allow her to finalize the divorce papers more promptly. I then contacted Marissa's office to inform her colleagues of her accident. They expressed their condolences and promised to visit her. The following 2 weeks were a blur of activity. I found a suitable 2-bedroom ground-floor apartment with an attached garage and secured it by paying the deposit and 2 months' rent up front, using funds from Marissa's half of our joint account. When the girls and Loretta arrived, we packed up all of Marissa's belongings, including our wedding album, and moved them to her new place. During this hectic time, I also received the results from the DNA lab, confirming that both girls were indeed mine. This was a small yet significant relief amidst the chaos. I met with the insurance adjuster to inspect the wreck of Marissa's car. Both of us were astounded she had survived the crash given the state of the vehicle. Since the car and insurance policy were in her name, the insurance company would issue her a check directly. I gathered the last of her belongings from the car and brought them to her new apartment, trying to close this painful chapter and focus on rebuilding our lives. A week after the accident, during a phone call, my mom asked, "Did you stop by Marissa's?" "No, I haven't," I replied, meaning since that initial visit. "Why?" she inquired. "I was just wondering," continuing with a tone of concern in her voice. She's made it clear she doesn't care about us and wants to escape everything, I explained. I'm giving her what she wants, just not how she planned it. 2 weeks later, I visited my doctor. Thankfully, I was clear of the gonorrhea Marissa had passed on, but we were still waiting to see if there was anything more serious. Physically, I was nearly healed, but emotionally, I was far from recovery. Later that day, I called my boss, Alan, to tell him I'd be returning to work, which pleased him greatly. That afternoon, the hospital called to say Marissa had woken from her coma. The nurse suggested I visit that evening, which worked well for me. I updated Gina, who had already filed the divorce papers and was waiting for Marissa to regain consciousness so the documents could be served. She arranged for the bailiff to meet me at the hospital. Next, I called Loretta to see if she would join me at the hospital. I then spoke to my daughters. "Your mom's awake," I told them. Their response was lukewarm, both shrugging off the news. "I'm going to see her this afternoon. Would you like to come?" "No thanks, Dad," Lisa replied firmly. "I'm too mad at her right now." "Me too," added Ginger, "and I've got a lot of homework." "All right," I said. "I'll drop you off at your grandparents' then." By 4:30, I was driving them to my parents' house. I told them Marissa was awake and that I would be meeting Loretta and the bailiff there. "Let us know how it goes, son," Dad said as I left the girls with them. "I will," I assured him. "I'll come back for the girls afterward." "Good. Then you can have some of Mom's lasagna when you get back," he said, offering a comforting smile. Mom's lasagna had a way of making any day better. "Sounds perfect," I said, feeling a slight lift in my spirits as I headed to the hospital. He handed her the documents. "You are being served with divorce papers," he stated formally. Marissa took the papers, her hands trembling slightly. There was a long pause as she scanned the top page, her face draining of color. "I see," she finally murmured, setting the documents beside her on the hospital bed. I turned to Loretta, who had remained silent, her expression somber. "Loretta, thanks for being here," I said. "Of course," she replied softly, her eyes not leaving Marissa. Turning back to Marissa, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. "We needed to resolve this," I told her, "for everyone's sake." Marissa nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted it to come to this." "I know," I said, although I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. "But here we are." The room was heavy with unspoken words and tension. I decided it was time to leave. "I'll let you rest," I said. Marissa didn't look up. "Thank you, Greg, and I am sorry," she added, her voice cracking slightly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. Loretta and I exited the room, leaving Marissa with her thoughts and the reality of the papers she now held. Outside, Loretta squeezed my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," I answered, managing a small smile. "Thanks for coming. It meant a lot." She hugged me briefly. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will," I promised. As I drove away from the hospital, the weight of the past week seemed to lift slightly. The future was uncertain, but at least now there was a path to begin moving forward. The process server handed Marissa the envelope and snapped a picture. "You've been served," he declared briskly before exiting the room. "You couldn't even wait until I was out of the hospital?" Marissa asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "No," I replied firmly. "You were the one who wanted to run away. I'm just accelerating your timetable by a few years." Her eyes searched mine for any sign of the man she once knew. "Do the girls know?" she asked, her tone shifting. "Yes, they do," I confirmed. "And they're not too fond of you right now, which is why they aren't here. And you don't need to worry about being burdened with them. I'm seeking full custody, though I'm willing to grant liberal visitation rights if they decide they want to see you. But as of now, they don't." Her expression faltered, clearly not expecting such decisiveness on my part. "And I suppose you hate me too?" she ventured. "Hate is a strong word," I countered calmly. "Let's just say my opinion of you has significantly diminished." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" she asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. "Maybe someday," I said, "when I can look at our girls and not see the hurt you've caused. And just so you know, I had their DNA tested. They're mine." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised by my proactive approach. "That won't change anything, Greg," she murmured almost to herself. "I see," I continued, shifting the topic. "When you're discharged, you won't be coming home. I've rented an apartment for you. Loretta will help you move in." Marissa turned to look at her sister, who had remained silent until now. "All your belongings are already there, and the utilities are set up in your name," I explained further, pulling out another envelope. "Here's your half of our joint savings, minus the deposit and 2 months' rent for the apartment. Since your car was totaled, you'll also be receiving an insurance payout." She took the envelope from my hand, her touch hesitant. The room filled with a thick silence that seemed to stretch between us, laden with the finality of our fractured lives. She took the envelope and nodded her head. "By the way, I know about the escape fund you set up. My attorney has frozen that account. If you sign the divorce papers, she'll release the funds," I said, "minus my half, of course." Marissa added, her expression a mixture of shock and resignation. "I'll fight you for it," she declared defiantly. "I don't think that would be wise," I countered, "unless you want all the evidence I've gathered to go public. It's quite damning." Her defiance seemed to deflate at my words. "Have your lawyer review the papers. I believe you'll find the terms are as fair as they can be under the circumstances." Marissa turned to Loretta, seeking support, but found none. "You should have listened," Loretta said coldly. "You lied to everyone, Greg, your kids and me. I agreed to help you move into your apartment when you're discharged, but after that, I'm done. You need to sort yourself out." Marissa started to sob. "I'm so sorry," she cried, looking for some sign of sympathy from her sister. "That and a few bucks will get you a coffee," Loretta snapped back. "I won't let you near my family again until you make things right, starting with a genuine apology to your husband and daughters." Through her tears, Marissa looked at me. "Greg, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I do love you." "Right, it doesn't mean much," I replied coldly. "Sign the papers, Marissa." She nodded, overwhelmed and silent. "Goodbye, Marissa." As I turned to leave, she called out, "Greg, can I call the girls?" "Please, you can call them," I said, pausing at the door. "But it's up to them if they want to talk to you." "I understand," she murmured. "Thank you for that, at least." "You're welcome," I said without turning back. I left the room, aware of the disapproving glances from the nursing staff. They might not have approved of the timing, but this was not their decision to judge. Driving away from the hospital, I headed to my parents' house. There, surrounded by family, I tried to find some solace in a hearty serving of my mom's lasagna. Letting the familiar comfort of home soothe the sting of a painful day. The divorce process concluded smoothly. 3 months later, I found myself not only legally free from Marissa, but also relieved to learn that I was HIV negative, a fortunate result mirrored by Marissa as well. To my surprise, Gina presented me with a check for over $450,000, half of the secret account Marissa had amassed. With no immediate need for such a sum, I allocated it into college funds for Lisa and Ginger. Life adjusted to its new rhythm for me and my daughters. They were my anchor, keeping me grounded amidst the challenges of single fatherhood. Although managing teenage girls on my own was sometimes trying, my mother's advice and support proved invaluable. Marissa, on the other hand, seemed to be settling into her role as a single divorced woman. After a year of cautious interactions, the girls began to reconnect with her, spending an occasional afternoon together. Marissa had resumed her real estate career with a new company following an unceremonious exit from her previous employer due to disclosed indiscretions. According to the girls, she was performing well and had shed her deceptive tendencies. Meanwhile, I noticed an increasing amount of attention from the single women at church. They often sent me home with homemade dishes, from pies to lasagna, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by my daughters. "Dad, you need to start dating again," Lisa encouraged one evening. "It's not good for you to be alone," she added. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I confessed, feeling out of touch with dating. "And, I'm not alone," I continued. "You two keep me quite busy." "We won't be around forever, though," Ginger chimed in, with a mix of seriousness and humor. "It's simple, Dad. Just ask someone out to dinner. You can do that, right?" Reflecting on Ginger's words, I realized she might be right. It was perhaps time to explore life beyond fatherhood. That very Wednesday, I encountered Rhonda Carson at the church's coffee shop. Rhonda, a widow who had lost her husband to a tragic accident and was raising her teenage daughter solo, had recently given me a casserole that I had particularly enjoyed. "Hi, Rhonda, how are you?" I initiated, recalling the comfort her dish had brought. "Hanging in there, Greg," she replied. "How about you?" "I'm doing okay. Really enjoyed that casserole last week. Thank you," I said, hoping to spark further conversation. "That's good to hear. It can be tough managing on your own, can't it?" She sympathized. "Yeah, it's a challenge sometimes, but we manage," I agreed, finding common ground in our shared experiences as single parents. Over coffee, we delved into the intricacies of raising teenagers alone. Encouraged by the ease of our exchange, I took a bold step. "Rhonda, I'm pretty new to this, but would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" "Maybe this Friday?" I asked, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. She smiled, her response warming my heart. "Yes, Greg, I'd like that," she accepted gracefully. "Great," I beamed, feeling a flicker of excitement about the possibilities ahead. "How about trying that new Texas Roadhouse place?" "Sounds perfect," Rhonda agreed. "It's a date then." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Perhaps it was the right moment to start anew, not just for me, but for everyone involved. The girls were excited about my date with Rhonda, and they liked the idea of spending the evening with Linda, so it was all set. That Friday, I invited the girls over, and we went out to dinner. Rhonda looked really cute in her denim skirt, and we had a great time. We didn't get too intimate that night, but Rhonda gave me a heartfelt kiss as I dropped her off at her house. I caught a glimpse of 3 faces peeking out from her window, and it looked like they were cheering us on. Rhonda hugged me and said, "That was the best night I've had in months." "Me too," I replied. "What if we do this again soon?" she suggested with a smile. "Maybe next time we can have a quiet evening in," she hinted playfully, her hand gently brushing my leg. I felt a spark of excitement. "That sounds like a plan," I agreed, enjoying the flirtation. The girls were thrilled about how well the date went, and honestly, I was too. Spending time with Rhonda felt natural and refreshing. While I'm not certain where this might lead, I'm open to exploring where our next steps might take us.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My informant had nailed it. Ethan Caro was indeed at the hotel, sitting on the far side of the room, away from the bar. I led the way to a table nearby, ordering drinks for the 3 of us when the waitress came by. After letting a few minutes pass, I stood up and casually walked over to him, smiling as our eyes met. "Hi, I'm Jake Waverly. Are you alone tonight? I was hoping you could do me a huge favor. My 2 female colleagues love to dance, but there's only one of me, and I'm not as young as I used to be. They hate being constantly hit on by guys with ulterior motives, and you seem like the decent type. Could you help me out and join us?" He hesitated, mentioning that he was married, but as planned, Maya came up and sweetened the deal with a bit of charm. As I'd suspected, he couldn't say no to a pretty woman asking politely. He agreed and followed me back to the table, where I introduced him to Alyssa. The band started playing, and Maya wasted no time taking him out onto the dance floor. Alyssa and I followed, and after a couple of dances, the girls switched partners. "So, what do you think, Maya?" I asked. Not the best answer, but he'll do. A little unsure of himself, but we can work on that. As you said, he's here all week for that training course. I gave him the cover story about us manning a booth at the conference center. I bought another round of drinks when we all sat down for a while. We kept it friendly and talked cars and sport. Then the girls got tappy feet again, so we went onto the floor for another half hour, having a third drink when the band took a break. The ladies excused themselves to go restroom together, and I turned to Ethan. "Thanks for helping me out here. I sure appreciate it." The girls only agreed to come along and work on the stand if I made sure they got some dancing every night. They've been to exhibitions in the past where they've had 6 straight nights of sitting in their rooms doing paperwork or watching TV, and they insisted that they weren't going to do that again. "You have to travel much in your line of work?" "No, this is the first week-long trip since I got married. That reminds me. I better call my wife and tell her I'm here and settled in at the hotel, okay?" I smiled at him. "How long have you been married?" "Just over 6 months. Word of advice from an older friend, Ethan. I know, and the girls know, that you're just being kind and neighborly dancing with them to help keep the wolves away. Your wife might not see it quite like that. Just tell her that you're having a couple of beers with the salesman you met, and then you're going to turn in." He nodded. She did seem anxious about me being away on my own, staying in a hotel for a week. She's right to be suspicious. There are a lot of people who play away when they're on business trips. You'd be surprised how many married women aren't wearing their wedding rings. Alyssa and Maya are both genuinely single, and I'm sure glad we found you for them to dance with, rather than some sleazeball sex hound with a wife and 4 kids back in Chicago. Anyway, you go make that call to your lovely wife. Can I get you another beer for when you get back? Please. He headed off for the foyer. The 2 girls returned to the table. He's gone to call Harper. You 2 going to slow dance with him tonight? Yeah, but we're not going to push it. I'd say we go for it tomorrow, then we'll have at least 4 nights. Okay by me. Beer or wine? Beer. This is thirsty work. Ethan returned 10 minutes later. The band was back, and he only had time for a swift chug at his beer before Alyssa dragged him away from the table. By 10 o'clock, he'd slow danced with both of them, and they had reported to me that he was without doubt rampantly heterosexual. They had that effect on a man. Maya and Alyssa announced that they were off to bed. They both kissed him and thanked him for the drinks and dancing and went off. I stayed chatting to him for another 10 minutes, and then pleaded preparation work for the morning and headed upstairs. He was a real nice guy. He would have made a great son-in-law. Shame about the woman he was married to. I unlocked my room and slipped the catch on the internal door to the adjoining room. Alyssa heard me and stuck her head round. "Can we join you? Be my guests." They were both dressed in bathrobes. When I got out of the shower, they were in my bed and padding the space between them. Why would I refuse the offer? When they were done with me, we cuddled and talked for a while afterwards, discussing what we would do the next day. There were plenty of places to see, and they'd done some research on what interested them. I set the alarm for 6:30, and we were showered and down for breakfast at 7:15. Ethan was already sitting at a table, so Maya asked if we could join him. He chatted away happily and said he was looking forward to our company that evening. We took a city tour bus in the morning, lunched at a pancake house, and spent the afternoon in the hotel pool and fitness center. Ethan was in the dining room when we went down for supper at 6:30. Alyssa took the chair next to him and Maya went opposite. We made up some lies about the exhibition hall and the convention. He told us about his training course. After the meal, he went up to his room to check in with his wife. We headed for the bar and the dance floor, and he joined us a quarter of an hour later. Fast forward 5 beers and some real close slow dancing, and Ethan was on seventh heaven as Alyssa rubbed herself into him. He made no objection as she took him up to their room. Maya and I had another few dances before going up to mine. Alyssa came through and woke us at 5 Tuesday morning when Ethan left her bed to go back to his room. She told us that he'd been very enthusiastic. We had breakfast with him as a quartet again. After he left for his course, Alyssa said that she'd be having a power nap after lunch. We went sightseeing again, had lunch out, and then all crashed for a couple of hours. Maya took Ethan up to her room straight after we'd eaten supper. Alyssa and I danced a bit until she joined them an hour later, and I had a quiet night reading in my room, apart from the passionate noises still audible through the closed connecting door. Wednesday morning, I was already at the breakfast table when a freshly showered Ethan joined me, closely followed by the 2 women. He looked pretty good considering he'd had such a hard night. Maya and Alyssa were just grinning. There was more sightseeing and window shopping during the day, and a lazy afternoon around the pool. After we ate, just as soon as Ethan had gotten his evening call to Harper out of the way, we made up a foursome in my room. It was the first time that I'd had sex since before I'd confronted Lana and ended our marriage, so about 5 years. I had a great time. The girls were out to impress, and I was really glad of my little blue pill. Alyssa still had the energy left to ride Ethan in the morning, and we even made it to breakfast on time. Thursday and Friday were pretty much the same. I gave the girls some cash for a bit of shopping, reminding them that they'd have to carry whatever they bought in their luggage, and I wandered around the City Art Gallery and Museum to use up the time. Ethan wasn't flying back until Saturday morning. His company was too tight to pay the Friday evening higher fares. I even gave him one of my blue pills when he was slowing down. Once that took effect, he was the Duracell bunny. We all wished him well when he staggered off after breakfast. He'd learned a whole lot about women that week. I guess that Harper would feel the benefit of a more experienced partner, but we did advise him not to try too many new moves at once, so she wouldn't get suspicious as to where he'd learned a trick or two. Once he'd left for the airport, I went down to collect my other bag from the hotel safe. I paid Alyssa and Maya the remaining $5,000 each in cash that I'd promised them and handed over the plane tickets to Atlanta to start their lives afresh. Then I gave them their shots and talked them through being sure to take the whole course of antibiotics which would complete the cure. I did say to get themselves checked out as being clear of STIs and to do better on using condoms in future. They both intended to get proper jobs and leave the sex industry behind. I'd written each of them a recommendation to help them. They were decent girls who'd been led astray down the wrong path and discovered that it didn't pay very much at their end of the market. I prayed that their new starts would work. The cushion of money I'd given them would keep them off the streets and give them that chance to get jobs. They both kissed me real affectionately as we parted at the airport. I'd almost considered keeping one or both of them, but they were way too young for me. It just wouldn't have worked out. It was a shame. They really did know their way around a man, and they were great company too. When I got home to my small apartment in Cincinnati that afternoon, I gave myself my own shot and swallowed the first capsule of the course. After all, even having religiously used condoms when the girls and I had been alone, Wednesday through Friday nights, I'd had nearly as much chance of having gotten infected as Ethan. He wouldn't show any symptoms for at least a few days, but by then he should have passed it on to Harper. So, what do I have against Harper? Quite simple. 5 years ago, my loving wife was having an affair with a work colleague, screwing him on our marital bed on Saturday mornings while I was out taking our 15-year-old daughter to her tennis class, then to the mall, then to lunch at the food court. The recordings from my house later showed that Harper not only knew what her mother was doing while we were out, she had actually suggested to her mom that she could keep me out of the way and that it would be safer if I was with her, so I wouldn't come home early and catch Lana with her lover. At least I'd had suspicions and was able to make some preparations before Lana could react to being found out. Lana and Harper got the McMansion in the divorce. It was too bad that I'd recently taken out a $500,000 loan against the equity to buy into the medical partnership and finance an addition and some pricey diagnostic equipment we needed. Of course, when I ended up getting 30 days in jail for assaulting Lana's lover in my own bedroom, my 3 partners invoked the moral turpitude clause I'd had them put in the agreement and terminated me with cause, so the money was lost, gone way beyond her reach. Her lawyer was real pissed that he couldn't get that loan document overturned, but we'd had it notarized and registered, and he couldn't do anything. When I got my license back again, I started working for the city as a salaried doctor in the public health department, earning enough for a single guy, but not enough for any great alimony demand. That upset him too. I couldn't afford to pay his fees in one go either, so he took a hit there. My lawyer said he got real pleasure out of telling the other guy that I'd paid him up front. The assault got me something else in the way of revenge as well. The lover's wife found out exactly why I'd blackened his eye and bruised his nuts. Using his own cell, I'd called her and told her before the police arrived. She took him to the cleaners in their divorce, and he blamed Lana for my finding out. When I'd done my time, and my attorney and a police officer walked me round what had been our home so that I could collect my personal belongings, Lana had already thrown out all the photographs that included me in them. I guess that meant she didn't want to reconcile, and I took our depleted wedding and new baby albums as consolation, filing them in the first dumpster I passed on the way to my new lodging. It had been bad enough knowing that my wife was being unfaithful. Discovering that our daughter was aiding and abetting my betrayal nearly tipped me over the edge. For years, I'd worked extra hours to buy my 2 women whatever they wanted. Harper had always been given everything she ever asked for. She had rewarded my fatherly love and devotion with treachery. Paying child support for the little brat for the next 2.5 years had stung my pride, which is why when my lawyer asked about visitation, I told him I didn't want to see her again. As far as I was concerned, she was no longer related to me, although I was determined that one day she would get to appreciate for herself the pain of having your spouse cheat on you. Harper and Lana had fallen out when they had to sell the house before it got foreclosed, and suddenly there was no spare money. Harper's standard of living suddenly dropped 90 points. Daddy's credit cards had been canceled, so couldn't be taken shopping at the mall. The tennis class was history. Lana's leased Lexus had to go back. Harper didn't get a car when she reached 16. She did quickly work out that if her mother hadn't cheated on me, then she'd have kept her comfortable lifestyle. Naturally, she plumb forgot her part in helping her mother to cheat on me. They weren't such bosom buddies after that. It had been no surprise to me that Harper had pretty much accepted the first guy with a job who asked her to marry him. His name was Ethan Caro. No, I'd never met him. I wouldn't have accepted an invitation to Harper's wedding, even if I'd been on her guest list. I did send a friend to take some photographs, though, so I'd know him even if he didn't know me. Now I'd spent some time with the guy. I found I liked him. He was far too good for my daughter, though. I felt no guilt at trying to sabotage their marriage. There was no guarantee that Ethan would continue to seek other female company whenever he got the chance, but we'd certainly given him a great taste of what was available away from home, and I was sure that I'd planted a seed in fertile ground, so he'd be looking for opportunities. With only a modicum of luck, the multiple exposures to Alyssa's gonorrhea and Maya's chlamydia would have been more than enough to ensure that he already had some special souvenir gift to pass on to his wife. I'd have one of my public health contacts make sure that Ethan got some treatment at the end of the week, hopefully a booster shot from the nurse at his work, without him ever discovering that he was infected. I just hoped that I'd be on duty at the STI clinic the day Harper came in to be tested. That would be the icing on the cake for me, making it out to be her fault, demanding the details of all her sexual partners, and sending the letters to them and their spouses. Ethan, of course, would get one of the first letters, test negative, guess who signs the test reports, and have a slam dunk no alimony divorce. Why was I so convinced that Harper was already cheating on Ethan? I had no evidence yet, but I strongly suspected it was going to be a case of like mother, like daughter. Her behavior at her bachelorette party showed very well that, with a week to go until her wedding day, she hadn't yet forsaken all others. Harper knew from her mother how easy it was to take a lover. Too bad if she didn't yet fully appreciate the downside. That reminded me, I needed to make sure I sent Ethan's divorce lawyer the photos and tapes at the appropriate time. Was it all going to be worth nearly 20 grand of the money I'd hidden in the divorce? If it worked, hell yes. Besides, my 3 ex-partners would each continue to hand over $1,000 a month in cash until I'd received back from them all $500,000 of my interest-free loan. That was the unwritten deal we'd shaken on when I found out about Lana. Okay, at only $36,000 a year, I was going to be another 13 years older by the time the debt was repaid. But I wasn't exactly hurting for money, and what else would I do with it? I hope that by giving Alyssa and Maya their new starts in life, I've done a good deed or two. Come to think of it, One of my receptionists is a young widow with a small daughter, and I just might set her up a date with Ethan once he's free again. Now, how to get some more revenge on Lana and her lover. Those are projects for the coming winter. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the story. Let's start. Alexander Alex Carrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city skyline. At 42, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of an international logistics company, Alex had built his empire through a relentless need for control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max bounded into the room, Claire's iPhone clutched in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone. With forced casualness, Alex took the device from his son. His heart nearly stopped as he saw the email chain between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were plotting to leave him, waiting for his father's inheritance. But something had changed. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a bit?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully toward the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine. "Care to explain this?" Alex said, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face drained of color as she saw the screen. She snatched the phone, her eyes darting between it and Alex. "How dare you look through my private emails?" "Our son found it," Alex replied coldly. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged, then straightened as a cold smile played across her lips. "I was waiting for your dad's inheritance," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But plans change now." Alex felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. But he wasn't done. With a smile, he pulled out his own phone, showing Claire a series of damning photos. Her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated. Remember the prenup?" Claire's shocked silence gave way to disbelief. "How do you know?" Without hesitation, Alex's voice turned to ice. "You're done. Pack your things. Tonight." Claire, panicked, began to realize the magnitude of her mistake. But it was too late. Alex had already turned his back, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. Mark Stevens sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed incessantly, Claire's name flashing on the screen with increasingly frantic messages. He knew their plan had unraveled spectacularly. Across town, Claire paced in a luxury hotel room, her designer luggage a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. She'd underestimated Alex, but she wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, Alex strode into Carrington Logistics, employees scattering before his thunderous expression. In his office, he immediately called his head of security. "I want Mark Stevens' access revoked. All of it. Now." His voice left no room for questions. But Mark was already a step ahead. Before his access was cut, he'd managed to funnel sensitive business information to several of Carrington Logistics' biggest competitors. Claire, meanwhile, was plotting her own revenge. With her sharp social skills, she began reaching out to her extensive network, spreading rumors about Alex's crumbling empire and tarnishing his once flawless image. As Alex sat in his office, reviewing the damage reports, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on line 1 for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, the ruthless Russian oligarch who'd been eyeing his company for years. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Zorin, what can I do for you?" "Ah, Alexander." Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss that merger we've been dancing around." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. Carrington Logistics is not for sale, Zoran. Not now, not ever. As he hung up, Alex realized he wasn't just fighting a personal betrayal. This was a direct threat to his entire empire. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but morally ambiguous investigator he'd hired to dig up dirt on Claire, Mark, and Zoran. Liam's findings were worse than he'd imagined. They'd been stealing from the company for months, Liam explained, sliding a file across the desk. They planned to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the spoils. Alex's jaw clenched as he reviewed the evidence. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zoran's just launched a series of strategic moves that's crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew he had to act fast. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zoran at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, smug and overconfident. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander. I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its worth. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Alex leaned forward. "You underestimate me, Zoran. This isn't over." As he left the meeting, Alex's mind was already formulating a plan. He'd not only survive this onslaught, but annihilate all his enemies in the process. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had uncovered, he filed a countersuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He then began systematically removing Mark's influence from within the company, firing his associates and cutting off his access to company funds. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating. As night fell over the city, Alex stood at his office window, looking out at the empire he'd built. The battle had only just begun, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and win he would, no matter the cost. Claire Carrington stood in the middle of her rented apartment, surrounded by designer luggage that looked out of place in the modest space. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed an ally, someone who could help her turn the tables on Alex. Her finger hovered over a name, Andrea Wells, investigative journalist. A cold smile played across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How'd you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports on the damage Claire and Mark had done. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on line 1. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. So, the war had begun in earnest. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" As Andrea laid out the accusations, corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings, Alex listened silently, his mind already formulating a counter-strategy. When she finished, he spoke only 2 words. "No comment." He hung up and immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you've got on Claire and Mark. Now." Days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still smarting from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, provided insider details that lent credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't satisfied with merely tarnishing Alex's reputation. She wanted to hit him where it truly hurt. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice hard. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Max, caught in the crossfire, retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father, saw the pitying looks from teachers. At home with Alex, he felt the tension, the barely contained fury that radiated from his father. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his world was falling apart. Alex, for his part, had anticipated this move. As Claire's lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready with a counterpunch. They leaked their own story to the press. A sordid tale of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, her manipulation of Max for her own gain. The public sympathy, fickle as always, began to shift. Claire found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and vicious social media posts. Her carefully cultivated image as the wronged wife crumbled. In the courtroom, Alex's lawyers were relentless. They presented evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, her plans to flee the country with company funds. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world collapsed. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled from the courtroom, her designer heels clicking on the marble floors. Outside, a sea of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Alex emerged moments later, Max's small hand clutched in his. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I asked for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up at his father. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly, "but it will be soon." Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. He'd been poring over them for days, looking for a weakness, any chink in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered warily. "Stevens. Mr. Stevens." The voice was heavily accented Russian. "I believe we have a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall." Mark sat up straighter. "Who is this?" "A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started." It was Zoran. Mark's mind raced. This was it. His last chance to strike back at Alex. "I'm listening," he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms began blaring from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Sir," his head of IT's panicked voice came through the speakers. "We're under attack. Massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised. Shipments are being rerouted." Alex's face hardened. He'd been expecting this, but the scale of the attack was beyond anything he'd anticipated. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he ordered. "Now!" As Carrington Logistics descended into chaos, Alex remained eerily calm. He watched as shipments were delayed, contracts were breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, media outlets all demanding answers. In his secret command center, buried deep beneath the Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, relaying real-time intelligence. "It's Mark," Liam confirmed. "He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more. He's got backing from Zoran. Serious backing." Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And our countermeasures?" Liam grinned, a predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In place and ready. Just say the word." Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console before him. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all those who had betrayed him, of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw clenched. "Execute," he said. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark was celebrating. His laptop showed the carnage unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zoran was on speakerphone, his satisfaction evident even through the tinny sound. "Excellent work, Mr. Stevens," Zoran purred. "Carrington is finished. I'll have my people draw up the acquisition papers immediately." Mark grinned, pouring himself another drink. "Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington," he toasted. But as he raised a glass to his lips, his screen went black. Then, line by line, text began to appear. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark?" Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized that writing style. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." His phone died. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, Mark heard heavy footsteps approaching his door. Zoran, in his lavish Moscow office, frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly cut. He barked orders at his subordinates, demanding to know what was happening. But as reports began flooding in of frozen assets, of raids on his properties, of arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with growing horror that he'd underestimated Alexander Carrington for the last time. Back in New York, Alex watched impassively as FBI agents let a handcuffed Mark from the motel. On another screen, he saw Zoran being escorted from his office by Russian authorities. Liam whistled low. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss." Alex didn't respond. He stared at the screens, at the empire he'd saved, at the enemies he'd destroyed. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt empty. His phone buzzed. A text from Max. "Dad, when are you coming home?" Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. "It's over," he said softly. "Let's go home." Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit a stark contrast to her haggard appearance. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline as she approached the receptionist. "I need to see Alex, Mr. Carrington," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, it's urgent." The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she kept her composure. "One moment, please." In his office, Alex was reviewing the final reports on the Zoran takedown when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you." Alex's jaw clenched. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. "Send her up." When Claire entered, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She took a hesitant step forward. "Alex, Save it." He cut her off, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or recognition. "What do you want, Claire?" She flinched at his tone, but pressed on. "I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance." Alex laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Claire step back. "Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your little game. And now what? You think you can bat your eyelashes and all will be forgiven." He moved to his desk, pressing a button. A holographic display sprang to life, showing social media feeds, news articles, financial reports. "You're done, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public." Claire's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I ruined you," Alex said simply. "Just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is I succeeded." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she sank into a chair. "What about Max? He needs his mother." Alex's expression hardened further. "You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to try and hurt me. He's better off without you." As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Mark's lawyer. "Client willing to make deal. Full confession in exchange for reduced sentence." Alex showed the message to Claire, watching as the last bit of fight left her eyes. "It's over, Claire. Mark's going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him." Claire stood on shaky legs, her world collapsing around her. As she reached the door, Alex spoke one last time. "Oh, and Claire, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me or you." The door closed behind her with a final, damning click. Alex turned back to the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed again. "Max! Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" A small smile tugged at Alex's lips. Perhaps not completely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat in his cell, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. He'd spend the next decade behind bars, but at least he'd avoided the life sentence Zoran was facing. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in ruins. Claire, once the toast of society, now a pariah, wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions turned to ash. And Zoran, his vast criminal empire dismantled, facing justice in a Russian court. And at the top of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfall. He had won, utterly and completely. Viktor Zoran stood at the window of his Moscow penthouse, a glass of vodka in his hand, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass showed a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shell of his former self. But Zoran was far from finished. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." Zoran's lips curled into a cold smile. He'd spent months rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back at Carrington with a vengeance. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all our systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw clenched. He'd been waiting for this. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now. But as the hours ticked by, it became clear that this was no ordinary attack. Zoran had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he wasn't just targeting Carrington Logistics. He was going after Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activities in Alex's accounts. Stock prices plummeted as sensitive information was leaked to the media. Investors panicked, pulling out in droves. Alex stood in his war room, surrounded by screens displaying the chaos unfolding across his businesses. Liam Quinn burst in. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zoran's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us. Environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. But before he could respond, another alert blared. "Sir," his head of security's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence." "Max." The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. "Get me to the house. Now." The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, Alex saw signs of a struggle. Broken glass, overturned furniture. He charged inside, calling for his son. "Dad!" Max's voice came from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. Near the window lay a man in black, unconscious. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I remember what you taught me, about being prepared." Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He'd taught his son to be strong, to be a survivor. But at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. Unknown number, Mr. Carrington. Zoran's voice, smooth as silk. "I trust one have your attention now." Alex's voice was cold fury. "You've made a grave mistake, Zoran." "Oh, I don't think so. This is just a beginning. I'm going to take everything from you, Carrington. Your money, your power, your legacy. And when you have nothing left, when you're broken and begging for mercy, then I'll end you." The line went dead. Alex looked at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zoran? Had his arrogance put everything and everyone he cared about at risk? But as quickly as it came, the doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. Zoran wanted a war. He'd give him one. Alex turned to Liam, who stood waiting for orders. "Call the team. It's time we finish this." once and for all. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, its basement converted into a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn stood at his right hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "All right," Alex said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Zoran thinks he's got us on the ropes. It's time we show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got?" Liam tapped a tablet, and holographic displays sprang to life around the room. "We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate, his money men, his enforcers, his political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man." A photo appeared, a severe-looking man with cold eyes. Dmitry Volkov, Zoran's right-hand man and the architect of the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. "And our plan, we hit them where it hurts," Liam said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos." Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. "And the lawsuits?" The lawyer smiled thinly. "We've got countersuits ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. When this gets out, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own." One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies. Financial attacks to freeze Zoran's assets, media campaigns to turn public opinion, backdoor diplomacy to ensure international cooperation in taking down the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. "You all know what's at stake here. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we've built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy, no quarter." The team dispersed, each member heading out to set the gears of Alex's counterattack in motion. But as they filed out, Liam hung back. "Boss, there's one more thing," he said, his voice low. "I think I found a way to lure Zoran out into the open, but it's risky." Alex raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Liam outlined his plan, a false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai, too tempting for Zoran to resist. But it would require Alex to put himself in the line of fire. "It's dangerous," Liam finished. "But if it works, we can end this once and for all." Alex was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Then he nodded. "Do it, but make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again." As Liam left to set the trap, Alex stood alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all the enemies he'd vanquished to get here. Zoran was just the latest in a long line of those who'd underestimated him. He'd be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. "Prepare the jet," he barked at his assistant. "We're going to the Middle East." The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. He didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way towards Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face contorted in rage as he realized he'd been set up. "Carrington," he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched him passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had threatened everything he held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam. "It's done. Volkov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished. Alex allowed himself a small smile. He'd won. Again. But as he looked around at the chaos he'd orchestrated, he felt no joy, no triumph. Just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Max. Dad, are you okay? When are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home. Time to face the consequences of the world he'd created. Months passed. The world watched in awe as Victor Zorin's criminal empire crumbled. Its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever, his company's stock soaring to unprecedented heights. Alex stood in his newly renovated office. Looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, not turning around. Max entered, now a young man of 16, the spitting image of his father. "The board is waiting, Dad. They're ready for your presentation on the Zorin acquisitions." Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He'd taken control of Zorin's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he'd only dreamed of before. His strategic mind had thrived in the aftermath of his victory, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex studied his son. Max had witnessed the darker side of his rise to power, had seen the ruthlessness required to survive in this world. But he'd also seen his father's intelligence, his resilience, his unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom, "in this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always be 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw a flicker of something in his son's eyes, admiration mixed with caution. Max respected his father's strength, his ability to overcome any obstacle. But he was careful not to emulate the cold ruthlessness that had defined Alex's path to the top. As the board meeting progressed, Alex laid out his plans for further expansion. The other executives listened in awe and fear, knowing that to cross Alexander Carrington was to court destruction. He'd proven that with Claire, with Mark, with Zorin. Mercy and forgiveness were weaknesses he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time in his life, he felt truly untouchable. He thought back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenups, setting in motion the chain of events that had led him here. He felt no regret for the choices he'd made, the lives he'd destroyed. In his mind, they had been obstacles to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged the undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard Max's footsteps. His son joined him at the railing, looking out over the city. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Max said softly. "Everything you've built." Alex nodded, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "And someday, it'll all be yours." Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. "Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it? The cost of getting here?" Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity that he himself had long since abandoned. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. In this world, Max, you take what you want or watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that. Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view. But Alex saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between admiration for his father's achievements and unease at the methods used to attain them. In that moment, Alex realized that while he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unquestioning allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by but not beholden to his father's legacy. And strangely, Alex found he was okay with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked, a moral compass, a reminder of the humanity he'd sacrificed on his climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, with Max by his side, it was time to secure his legacy for generations to come. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I am a man in my mid-20s. I paused my university studies to work part-time, living earnestly. I have a family that is irreplaceable to me, more precious than anything in the world, though I live alone now originally. My home was one where 3 generations lived together. My grandparents, my parents, and I lived together in a bustling household. The grandmother I speak of is not actually my father's biological mother. His birth mother passed away before he was even 3 years old. The grandmother I know married my grandfather, who felt guilty for not being able to properly care for his son after his wife's death. Ever since my father was a child, my grandmother has taken care of him as if he were her own, and they share a very close bond. If my grandparents ever had an argument, my father would invariably side with my grandmother. He regards her more highly than his own birth mother. My grandmother, fearing that my father might feel neglected if she had her own children, chose not to have any. Thus, my grandmother has always treated my father as her own son. Even after I was born, she told my mother, "You pursue what you want to do. I'll take care of the child. Don't worry." We weren't in a situation where my mother needed to work. My grandfather had built a considerable fortune from a brick factory, and with my grandmother's support, my father was able to attend a prestigious university and secure a professional job. My mother, who married my father, is also a person with many dreams, especially sharp in business matters. She now runs a factory supplying building materials, a business passed down from my grandfather. My grandfather adored my mother for fulfilling the dream of business expansion that he couldn't achieve through his son. Naturally, our family relationship strengthened. While living together, my grandmother also helped me with my studies and managed my academic portfolio. Like my father, I found that I was more suited for academics than physical labor, and ended up attending the same university as him, following in his footsteps. While not exactly the same profession, I too am studying in a field that could lead to a specialized career. I attribute my admission into such a prestigious university entirely to my grandmother's influence. And even after moving out to live on my own, I frequently visited my family. Then one day, my grandfather was suddenly diagnosed with cancer. He had never been a drinker, yet he was diagnosed with liver cancer, which was a difficult time for our family. My parents were still busy with their lives, and the news that my grandfather didn't have much time left brought a shadow over our family. However, initially given only about 6 months to live, my grandfather fought the disease for nearly 2 years. He bravely underwent treatment, wanting to do whatever he could for his family. Unfortunately, after 2 years of battling the illness, he passed away. I sometimes think he endured all that time wanting to see his beloved grandchild. My parents even told me, "Grandfather wanted to see you." That's why he was so diligent with his treatment, with a sense of sorrow. After my grandfather's funeral, my grandmother declared her intention to live separately. Despite my parents' strong objections, she insisted, "You all are grown up now, and I want to enjoy some time with my friends. Just check in on me occasionally. It's not like I'm going to die right away." And she moved out spiritedly. It was probably my grandmother's way of considering my parents. She seemed fine, going on cruises and trips to Europe with her friends, always bringing back gifts for us. We thought she was doing well. However, one day, I received a call from my mom saying, "Your grandmother seems to be unwell. Can you go check on her? I'm on a business trip and won't be able to visit until tomorrow." After a long while, I decided it was time to see my grandmother and spend some time with her. So right after my part-time job, I headed to her place. Upon arrival, it seemed like she had come down with a severe flu, as she was bedridden and barely moving. So I made her some warm tea. My grandmother married my grandfather when she was still in college, quite young, and after my grandfather passed away, she seemed to have lost a lot of her vitality, which worried me a lot. To lighten the mood, I pretended to be more cheerful and reminisced about old times with her. My grandmother told me, "You and we don't have the age gap of a grandmother and grandson, maybe more like that of a mother and her youngest son. I've raised you more like my own son than my grandson," patting me softly. Nostalgia hit me, and I ended up falling asleep in her arms. When I woke up, it was nearly midnight, and I thought I should leave before the last train departed. Trying not to wake her, I carefully tried to get out of the bed. That's when my grandmother quietly called my name. She then told me, "Stay here tonight. I've been feeling really lonely and scared lately." Despite her strong opposition to living separately in front of my parents, it seemed she was actually feeling lonely and scared. I lay down again, feeling guilty for not understanding my grandmother's feelings, holding her hand tightly. Suddenly, she turned towards me. Turning my head to look at her, she said, "How did our Oo get to be so handsome? And so tall too?" While patting my back, I tried to pull away, saying it tickled. But where my grandmother's hand landed was truly surprising. Feeling somewhat guilty, I turned over. While she had been playfully teasing me, suddenly she became quiet. Then, at some moment, she took a bold action while holding my hand. I was perplexed, but naturally followed her lead as she guided me. Initially, I wondered, is this okay to do with my grandmother? But once we started, I couldn't stop. She guided me with the same kindness she had shown when teaching me my studies in my childhood. Waking up in the morning, the events of last night felt so peaceful, they might as well have been a dream. As usual, my grandmother woke me up from sleeping in, and we had a late breakfast together. She thanked me for visiting despite my busy schedule, and even gave me some pocket money. I started to apologize. "I'm sorry, but she cut me off, saying, "Stop there. Your grandmother wanted to relieve you of your stress, thinking it might be hard on our young grandson. It helped me alleviate my loneliness too. Let's not feel sorry for each other, okay?" Hearing this, my heart felt at ease. Since I didn't have a part-time job that day, I returned directly to my studio apartment. No matter how much I thought about it, whether it was a dream or reality, it had indeed happened. but my grandmother's nonchalant behavior left me confused as well. Then, a good idea struck me. I decided to buy her some natural oils as a gift. My grandmother really loves aromatherapy oils and massages. She always purchases well-known and nicely scented products for her home. I did my research and spent a portion of my paycheck from my part-time job on expensive natural oils. With my grandmother's birthday coming up soon and the family planning to gather, I thought it would be the perfect time to give her the gift. I didn't contact my grandmother until then because I was a bit confused. After all, she had raised me since I was young, and I thought she might have been equally taken aback. When my grandmother's birthday arrived, our family gathered at a restaurant. After a simple meal and singing the birthday song with a cake, we presented her with birthday gifts. My grandmother was visibly surprised when she unwrapped my gift and saw it was natural oils. The family also asked my grandmother, "Why, don't you like the gift from Ooh?" Of course. My grandmother hurriedly replied, "No, I was just glad because I used to use this a long time ago. Thank you all for the gifts." I thought my grandmother clearly remembered the events of that day. So, when everyone was about to head home after the meal, I blurted out, "I want to stay at Grandma's house tonight." My parents said, "That's a good that is. Take good care of Grandma." Only my grandmother gave an awkward smile and said, "All right, my strong grandson, let's go to my house," with a meaningful smile. Seeing my grandmother's smile, I smiled brightly back at her and headed to her house with her. My grandmother told me, "I've prepared the guest room for you. You can sleep there." I was very disappointed. Seeing my expression, my grandmother gave me a bright smile and winked. I followed her into the master bedroom. My grandmother seemed a bit surprised when I followed her in, but went into the bathroom to shower without saying anything. I also took a shower in the bathroom in the living room and took the natural oil. I gave her to my grandmother's room. After her shower, my grandmother lay down next to me. When I asked her, "Are you going to sleep?" she just shook her head. Feeling a bit suffocated, I asked her, "When did you start feeling that way?" My grandmother looked flustered and said, "It wasn't that I harbored those feelings that day. It just happened spontaneously. I was wondering what to do, but then my grandmother asked me, 'Did you buy the oil on purpose?' I just nodded, and then my grandmother opened the oil I had placed next to her and handed it to me. She slightly lifted her shirt and lay down on the bed, saying, 'Since you've bought it, let's use it.' I agreed and slowly massaged her using the oil. During this, my grandmother guided me, and we spent a pleasant time together. The next morning, while I was deep in sleep, my parents came to my grandmother's house. My grandmother and I, who were oversleeping, hurriedly got dressed and went out to meet my parents. My parents said, "It seems you both slept well yesterday. Your skin looks very glossy." Then they took out seaweed soup and side dishes they had brought for lunch and celebrated my grandmother's birthday once again. My heart was pounding, wondering if my parents had noticed anything, but it seemed they were completely unaware. After my parents left, my grandmother sighed deeply, and I also felt relieved. Then we had a few more pleasant times under the excuse of oil massages that day. My grandmother shows me a polite attitude. The way she squints her eyes and shows a bright smile when our eyes meet is dazzlingly beautiful. Sometimes I think, what if my grandmother was the one who gave birth to my father? Lately, I feel fortunate that my grandmother and I do not share a single drop of blood.